to the Scottish Parliament and see Pauline back as well, and we see Joanne and James as well. So 4 great candidates who will make a real difference in the Scottish Parliament.
Jackson Carlow making faces at you and he's shaking his head.
It's what was predicted. It wasn't. The Labour Party were expecting to take 5. They expected to get Bill Butler in. Nobody was predicting 2 Conservatives in the city of Glasgow. And when we look at the new Labour team coming from Glasgow, it's 2 retreads: Anas Sarwar and Pauline McNeill. No new talent emerging from the Labour Party to take the party forward at Holyrood. We've got Annie Wells, a completely atypical Conservative. She announced the other day her mother used to be Michael Martin, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, domestic leader. And here is Annie Wells, absolutely the archetypal new kind of Conservative Ruth is trying to bring forward, elected in the city of Glasgow. Quite extraordinary.
And congratulations to her for being elected. But you cannot say that the talent of Anas and Pauline and
it's
the
not
others...
new talent.
But neither...
All of these people have lost their seats. Well, these are all Labour politicians who've been defeated. Now, listen...
Well, in fairness, in the past, that's how MSPs used to get elected. All right. Hang on a minute.
People who have experience as well as new talent. I think that's the mixture that brings into the Parliament.
OK, let's do...
Congratulations to them for being elected.
Exactly. I think we should say that.
OK, hang on a second, guys. We're going to go to Glasgow to hear from Aileen Clark, who's with the new, or one of the new Conservative MSPs for the city.
Annie Wells, congratulations. You've been returned on the list for the Conservatives. How does that feel?
It feels absolutely amazing.
Now, when you walked in here tonight, did you think we'd be having this conversation now?
Probably not, no. Not 100% no, but there's always a possibility in an election, I suppose, but no, it's an absolute dream.
And we should, of course, emphasise that you're one of 2 Conservative politicians returned on the list this time.
Yes.
So the last time round it was just Ruth Davidson. Tonight it's yourself and Adam Tompkins.
Yeah.
So you must be really pleased with that result.
Absolutely delighted with the result, and I think the result shows just how good a team we have in Glasgow and how much Glasgow is changing towards the leadership and strength that Ruth Davidson's offering as well. So it's been great, absolutely great.
Are you finding you're being listened to on the doorsteps now? Because Glasgow is a tough beat for you guys.
We've been listened to a lot more this year than we were last year, and I think that's all coming around because we're sending the right message out there. We're speaking to people more, and people are actually listening and understand what we're about and getting what we're about.
You said to me earlier you're getting less doors shut in your face this time.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely less doors getting shut in your face. I mean, there's more and more people actually willing to stop in the street and speak to you, and even passing you by. They'll say, "Oh, who are you?" And you explain to them, they go, "No," but they'll still stop and talk to you. So it's really good. I mean, obviously with the result tonight, we can see that Glasgow is changing as well.
So obviously you're very delighted about your result, but it's been a good night for the party.
Oh, it's been a fantastic night for the party, and again, we're still waiting on the regional list results coming in throughout the city, but Jackson Carlow winning Eastwood, and we've got John Scott keeping Ayr. So, I mean, everything, the momentum, and the biggest one for me is Oliver Mundell winning tonight as well, so it's been huge, and it's new faces in there as well that are winning, so that's ideal.
So much for you to be happy about tonight.
Oh, absolutely delighted, yes, and obviously bed probably very soon.
Annie Wells, thank you very much indeed, and congratulations
Thank
once
you
more.
very much. Cheers.
Annie Wells saying that she's absolutely delighted, a dream come true, and that Glasgow is changing in terms of its politics. The Tories picking up 2 seats there. Let's cross to Inverness, I think. Dingwall, in fact. I knew it was in the Highlands somewhere. David Coburn is leader of the UK Independence Party, his party's lead candidate in the Highlands and Islands. Obviously, you're contesting only list seats at this election, David Coburn, and we've only had Glasgow list declared. How do you expect your party to do?
I just don't know. I mean, it's all surprises. I can see that it looks like the Unionist vote is trying to remove itself from Labour and go elsewhere. It seems to be coalescing behind the Tories. I don't know how we're doing at the moment. I'm waiting to see what happens on the list. I'm hoping a great deal of it's going to come to us. But it looks like it's a lineup either pro or against independence. Which seems to be a continuation of what's going on before. But it looks like the Labour Party is pancaking.
You've taken a very strong pro-UK position, but yet it is the Conservatives at this election who seem to be picking up potentially that strong pro-union vote?
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, I haven't seen our results, so I can't possibly tell you. We await them with, sort of with excitement, and although I've just had a half an hour sleeping in the back of a plumber's van, which is not the most comfortable thing to do, but we don't know yet. Until the figures come out, I really can't say, to be honest. But I'm very happy that we're not having more Scottish nationalism, or at least something is happening to change things around. The Labour vote's definitely collapsing, and well-deservedly, I should think, the way they've been behaving.
And during this campaign, people in your party calling for you to resign, clearly infighting remains a feature of UK Independence Party politics. Any chance that if you don't pick up seats, you'll be away?
Certainly not. There was 7 people who were putting their own personal careers above the parties, who were moaning because they were not picked. Well, bad luck to them. They're poor losers, and they've let down the party, and they've let down the cause, so I don't think people are going to miss them at all.
David Coburn, leader of the UK Independence Party, thanks very much indeed. And one of those critics is actually the lead candidate in Lothian, so we'll hear how he does on the Lothian list in just a few moments' time. I think
8,526.
We've got the declaration from Argyll and Bute.
Cast was 29,592, therefore given a turnout of 60.98%. I, Sally Loudon, Returning Officer for the Scottish Parliament election in Argyll and Bute constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes polled for each candidate at this election was as followed. Cameron Donald, Scottish Conservative and Unionist, 5,840. Alan Reid, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 7,583. Mick Rice, Scottish Labour Party, 2,492. Michael Russell, Scottish National Party, 13,561. The total valid votes was 29,476. Reasons for rejections: voting for more than one candidate was 7. Unmarked or void for uncertainty, 109.
So the SNP holding Argyll and Bute, the former Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell re-elected as the MSP with 13,561 votes. The former Liberal Democrat MP Alan Reid in second with 7,583. The Conservatives Donald Cameron with 5,840 and Labour's Mick Rice with 2,492. The turnout in Argyll and Bute, 60%, very strong turnout there. The SNP with 46% share of the vote, 26 for the Liberal Democrats, 20 for the Conservatives and 8 for Labour. The SNP vote is actually down 5 there. The Lib Dems up 14, the Conservatives up 2 and Labour down 7. So a swing in Argyll and Bute. SNP to Liberal Democrat, a 9% swing, but not enough to dislodge Michael Russell. He retains the seat for the SNP. Now let's just confirm the details of that Glasgow list result. The first regional list to declare. 4 Labour, 2 Conservatives and 1 Green. So Labour's Anna Sarwar, Joanne Lamont, James Kelly and Pauline McNeill elected. Let's see what happens in Lothian for the list declaration there.
The Scottish Parliament election for the Lothian region. The total electorate was 565,860 votes. Total number of votes cast was 327,719. So the turnout for the regional election was 57.9%. Parties standing in the Lothian region received the following votes. Rise 1,641 votes. Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party 74,972. Scottish Green. Scottish Green Party 34,551. Scottish Labour Party 67,991 votes. Scottish Liberal Democrats 18,479. Scottish National Party 118,546. Scottish Women's Equality Party 3,877. Solidarity 1,319. UK Independence Party 5,802. The candidates, therefore, whom seats have been allocated to are Miles Briggs, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Alison Johnson, Scottish Green Party. Kezia Dugdale, Scottish Labour Party. Gordon Lyndhurst, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Neil Findlay, Scottish Labour Party. Jeremy Balfour, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. And Andy Whiteman, Scottish Green Party.
Big celebrations for the Greens, amongst others. In Lothian, the Conservatives leapfrogging the Labour Party, finishing with 3 seats. Labour finishing with 2, but getting their party leader, Kezia Dugdale, elected, and the Greens picking up the remaining 2 seats in Lothian. A breakthrough for them, not just returning Alison Johnson, who you see on the right of your picture there, but returning a second Green MSP in Andy Whiteman. In the centre of the frame, Kezia Dugdale, leader of the Labour Party, one of 2 Labour MSPs elected in Lothian, but they had 3 last time, and the Conservatives have finished ahead of them in this election. Now, despite the fact that the SNP got far more votes than any of the other parties, because they've done well, they've performed strongly in the constituencies in this part of Scotland, they get nothing on the list. There's the confirmed result. 3 Conservatives, 2 Greens and 2 Labour MSPs in Lothian. Let's confirm the names. Miles Briggs, Gordon Lyndhurst and Jeremy Balfour, all new members of the Scottish Parliament for the Tories. Alison Johnson returns with Andy Whiteman as her Green sidekick, and Kezia Dugdale for Labour, re-elected alongside Neil Findlay, who also served in the last Parliament. Let's get Mid-Scotland and Fife results.
Fife region. The electorate was 499,093. The total number of votes cast was 291,640. The turnout was 58.43%. The number of votes cast for political parties was as follows. Rise, Respect, Independence, Socialism and Environmentalism, 1,073. Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 73,293. Scottish Green Party, 17,860. Scottish Labour Party, 51,373. Scottish Liberal Democrats, 20,401. Scottish Libertarian Party, 650. Scottish National Party, 120,128. Solidarity, Scotland's Socialist Movement, 1,049. UK Independence Party, UKIP, 5,345. Total number of valid votes was 291,172. I declare that the regional member seats for the Mid-Scotland and Fife region have been duly allocated to the following candidates. First additional member, Murdo Fraser, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Second additional member, Alec Rowley, Scottish Labour Party. Third additional member, Liz Smith, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Fourth additional member, Claire Baker, Scottish Labour Party. Fifth additional member, Dean Lockhart, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Sixth additional member, Alexander Stewart, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Seventh additional member, Mark Ruskell, Scottish Green Party.
Scotland and Fife result has doubled the number of Conservatives representing that region from 2 to 4. They're the big winners in Mid-Scotland and Fife. 2 seats for Labour, down from 3 last time around, and 1 for the Greens. That's a breakthrough for them. There are the confirmed MSPs for Mid-Scotland and Fife. Murdo Fraser, Liz Smith, Dean Lockhart and Alexander Stewart elected for the Tories. The latter 2 new members of the Scottish Parliament. Labour's Deputy Leader, Alec Rowley, that's his lifeline. The Mid-Scotland and Fife list, he's been elected on that alongside Claire Baker, who also served in the last Parliament as a list member. And the Greens' Mark Ruskell, who did serve as an MSP between 2003 and 2007, is making a comeback this time around, but no prizes in Mid-Scotland and Fife for the Liberal Democrats. So, Mid-Scotland and Fife, there's the breakdown of the votes. The SNP winning the regional list in terms of the number of votes, 120,000 for them, but not a single seat again, because the system is designed to balance out the overall share of the vote that parties get and link that to the number of seats that they end up with in the Parliament. The Conservatives second, but picking up 4 seats with 73,293 votes. Labour third with 51,000 votes. The Liberal Democrats with 20,400, but not getting a single seat. And the Scottish Greens picking up 1 with 17,860. No prizes either for the UK Independence Party or the smaller socialist parties in Mid-Scotland and Fife. So the share of the vote, 41 for the SNP, 25 for the Conservatives, 18 for Labour, 7 for the Lib Dems, 6 for the Greens and 2 for UKIP. The SNP down 4, Conservatives up 11, Labour down 7. Let's hear from their leader, Kezia Dugdale.
Returning officer, and to all the counting staff, the police and everyone who made this election possible. We don't forget the hard work that you all do, and nor should we take for granted the great privilege of taking part in a democratic decision over who governs us. Thank you most of all to the people of Edinburgh and the Lothians for re-electing me. It has been the biggest honour of my life to represent you and to campaign on your behalf. I congratulate Nicola Sturgeon on her victory this evening and on securing a 3rd term in office. I promise Labour will be an effective but positive opposition over the coming years. This election was always going to be tough for the Scottish Labour Party, just a year after a painful general election defeat. But I am proud that our campaign rose to the challenge of offering an alternative vision for what could be done in our new, more powerful Parliament. I want to thank all of those who voted for my party across the country, all the people who volunteered, and of course, to all of our candidates. Your support means the world to me. I know that any disappointment felt by my colleagues and friends who have lost tonight is, for Labour, secondary to the concern they feel about the impact of the cuts yet to come and the continued austerity that working people across Scotland will face. For our part, Labour in the new Parliament, led by me, will do as we promised in this election. We will fight to ensure that the Parliament uses its new powers and fulfils its great potential. I was adamant that I would fight this as an election about the future, talking about the potential for change, using the powers of our new Parliament to deliver that change, instead of rerunning the arguments of the past. And I know that for some, the constitutional argument remains the most important factor when casting their vote, and my determination to try and move the Scottish debate on will have cost me and my party votes tonight. But in the long run, I believe our politics has to be about the future of our economy, the life chances of the children in this country and our public services. And I and my party will continue to make that argument in our new Parliament. So, I'd like to thank the thousands of activists across the country who have worked so hard on this campaign. Not least all those members in Edinburgh Eastern who ran a phenomenal campaign, often in recent times in my absence, led by the best possible election agent in Gareth Lodge. I also pay tribute to my wonderful partner and soulmate, Louise Riddell. I've come a long way during this campaign and I've also had to come out as well. So thank you to Louise for that. There's no doubt that our defeat for the Labour Party tonight is painful, but it is not the end of our campaign. We will continue to argue for Labour values, Labour ideas and Labour principles. There are work to renew the Scottish Labour Party so that it's fit to serve the people of Scotland continues. Thank you.
The Labour leader, Kezia Dugdale, conceding the election, offering her congratulations to Nicola Sturgeon on securing a third term for the SNP in the Holyrood vote 2016. She said, though, that she was proud of the Labour campaign, and she said that Labour in the new Parliament, led by her, would continue to argue the case for Holyrood to use its new powers to fulfil the potential that they bring. And she also touched on the Labour campaign. She said that Labour's attempt to move the debate on in Scotland will have cost them votes tonight. Perhaps a quick reflection on that from Brian Taylor as he brings us his latest analysis.
Glenn, Glenn, that's really intriguing that Kezia Dugdale's willing to state that. Wasn't her face a picture just before she went on the platform there? It wasn't entirely gloomy, but it was certainly under-enthused. How could it be other than that? It's been a dreadful night for the Labour Party. Let's take a look at some of the results so far, though. This is the screen that we've got. There's the chamber filling up there, all vast numbers of SNP members in the middle. Let's take a look, though. Oh, there's the chamber in more detail. 92 seats declared. We're beginning to get those regional results in as well. 58 for the SNP. Remember, they need 65 if they'd have an overall majority. 15 for the Conservatives, keeping Labour so far in third place. The Tories not just picking up constituencies, but picking up list seats as well. And look at this one. 4 for the Greens, 4 for the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats were triumphant, understandably so, when they won a couple of seats on the mainland to match those seats of Orkney and Shetland that they already held. But now the Greens are beginning to eat into that by winning on the list. The SNP aren't winning seats on the list. Why so? Because they've got umpteen seats in constituency votes. The Liberal Democrats are not winning seats on the list. Why so? Because the other parties are ousting them. They're just tending to take over more. Let's look at the next figure, which is constituency share, and then that's the share of the vote on the constituencies. SNP 47, pretty close to there was 45 last time. Holyrood Parliament was contested. 49.99. Who's arguing? 50 at the UK general election last year. Labour on 23, Conservatives on 21, eeksy peeksy there. 8 for the Liberal Democrats. The Greens only stand in a few seats. Let's look at the change, though. It's the change that tells the story. SNP, they're up a percentage point. OK, you say, oh, it's only 1%. They've been in power for 9 years, for goodness sake. This is a third term they're entering. The Labour Party, woof, down 9. Conservatives up 8. The Dems pretty well a standstill. The Greens, again, it's the list that matters to them. So let's look at the regional list share, first of all. Share of the vote on the regional list. Again, the SNP are topping that poll, but because they gained so many constituencies, it doesn't do them any good. They don't get it because it's a corrective mechanism. And on the list, the Conservative Party are that little fraction ahead of the Labour Party. Perhaps one reason why they're picking up those list seats. The Greens are a fraction ahead of the Liberal Democrats. That's the reason they're picking up those list seats. UKIP among the others there, but yet to register, Glenn.
Thanks very much indeed, Brian. Let me just share with you a couple of words of analysis from Professor John Curtis of Strathclyde University. He says it now looks as though the SNP are at risk of failing to secure a second overall majority in the Holyrood Parliament. We'll have to form a minority administration, perhaps with the support of the Scottish Greens, who have already doubled their numbers from 2 to 4. Professor Curtis also saying that the Conservatives now look as though they will emerge comfortably ahead of Labour in terms of seats in the Holyrood Parliament, although Labour are slightly ahead of the Conservatives in terms of votes won on the constituency ballot. More, I'm sure, from him and from our new political analyst, who's who's joined us from Edinburgh University, Professor Charlie Jeffrey. But right now, I want to cross to Fiona Stalker with our guests in our election cafe. Morning, Fiona.
A morning, Glenn, and I can say that the regional results have certainly woken up the election cafe for anyone who's having a sleepy moment. There's been some fascinating reactions from the spin doctors, from the journalists, from the commentators, from the bloggers. I've got Kevin McKenna with me, who describes himself as a traditional Labour supporter who is pro-yes. Also, Paul Sinclair, who's a former advisor to Scottish Labour Party, and Kevin Pringle, who's the former director of communications for the SNP. Kevin McKenna, first of all, interesting there hearing Kezia Dugdale say that the party's attempts to move on the constitution debate has cost the party votes. It's been a dreadful night for Labour.
Yeah, it's very difficult to see where Labour in Scotland go from here. I've heard a few opinions this evening along the lines of they must embrace the constitutional question more, and by that I take it that they moved more towards independence or yes. There's one big problem with that. All those who were Labour supporters and who did favour yes in the constitutional debate have migrated to the SNP, so presumably those that are left in the Labour Party are no supporters. In terms of being a party of the Union, well, the Conservatives, according to the people of Scotland, are seen more as a party of the Union than Labour. So they're squeezed on the constitutional issue. I don't see where they go from here in terms of their policies either, because, in my opinion, they put forward a comfortably left-of-centre traditional Labour manifesto. The message didn't get through. Their voters who migrated to the SNP have stayed with the SNP. It all says to me that in the future, the very near future, Scotland will continue to be dominated by the constitutional question.
OK, well, Paul Sinclair, where on earth does Labour go from here?
Well, I mean, I think it was good there that Kez admitted essentially that this strategy is wrong. You've got to be where the people are. We had a referendum campaign that lasted nearly 3 years. We're fewer than 2 years away from that. It still dominates. And what the Labour Party did was they repeated the mistake of last year's general election, which was instead of chasing the 55% who won the referendum, largely middle class, they decided they would chase that bit of the 45% who'd abandoned Labour. That was a mistake, and they've repeated it. It would have been very easy this time to be the party of the Union and say, if you're serious about defending the Union, don't vote Conservative, vote Labour. They need somehow to get back to that position. And I think, to be fair to Kez Dugdale, she's only been here in the job for 8 months. She needs to be able to get her own team in, her own agenda, and then I think the party can be properly reformed the way it couldn't have been after 2011 because we had the referendum to fight.
Kevin Pringle, and we've talked a lot about Scottish Labour and about the Tory revival, but what sort of night have the SNP had? Because we're talking about the possibility of a coalition government.
Well, it's been a historic third-term achievement for the SNP. If you look at the first-past-the-post seats, for example, winning more seats this time than 2011 with a slightly larger share of the vote, which is a pretty extraordinary achievement by any measure for a party seeking a third term. But I think what Nicola Sturgeon wants to do is just to get down to the job of governing. She set out really major ambitions on education, closing the attainment gap between people from rich and poor backgrounds, investing significantly more than inflation increases in the National Health Service, for example. So she wanted to get her own mandate. She's got that by any standard, an extraordinary level of support, even a bit above what we got in 2011. She has her own mandate. She's got a really bold, radical policy agenda. She just wants to get down and get her team of ministers assembled and get on with the job as soon as possible.
OK, well, if you do want to let us know your thoughts on any of this, and it's a much more interesting election, I think, than a lot of people expected, then do let us know on social media. Just remember, the hashtag is SP16. Glenn.
Well, we're going to hear from the Labour leader, Kezia Dugdale, in a moment. First, let's go to Glasgow and talk to Patrick Harvey of the Greens. Congratulations on your re-election. The Greens currently sitting on 4 MSPs, twice as many as you had in the last Parliament. Do you think that you are going to end up as the 4th placed party at Holyrood, displacing the Liberal Democrats?
Well, we still hope so. We do still have a few regions left to declare, so I'm on tenterhooks for those. I'll hopefully be heading west to the West of Scotland declaration in time for that in a few minutes' time. What's clear is that we've managed to gain huge momentum, certainly in Glasgow, where we came 2nd in Glasgow Kelvin. That's the closest we've ever come to winning a constituency, and I'm told that it's the closest that anybody's come to challenging the SNP in any constituency in Glasgow. So we've gained momentum, we've gained a lot of profile, I think, during this campaign, and we've certainly gained the expertise and the experience of getting our campaigners and volunteers out there on a scale that we've never seen before. So it's momentum that we'll continue to build on.
Now, no doubt that the SNP have won this election and won their 3rd term, but it's not clear that the party will win that overall majority. If they fall short, how closely would Greens be prepared to work with the SNP to support them in office?
Well, I think you've got access to more of the number crunching than I've got right here in front of me, so I'm going to have to wait and see what the result looks like. Everybody's going to have to, in the cold light of day, well, it is daytime already, isn't it? It's good. It's the morning. We're going to have to look at the results once we've had a bit of time to digest them. What we've always said is that we bring constructive challenge to bear, and in many areas, many policy areas, Greens' constructive challenge, being constructive where we can, giving fair credit where it's due, but pushing the SNP to go further when they're not going far enough. That's the attitude that's got results. It's got them to move ground on issues like fuel poverty and energy efficiency, on protecting tenants in the private rented sector, and indeed on issues like land reform. We'll continue to do that, and whatever the overall balance of MSPs in the next session of the Scottish Parliament is, we'll continue to bring that constructive challenge to bear, because we know that it gets results. It's far more effective than just standing in the chamber shouting and ranting as though everything the SNP do is terrible. That's just not rational, and it doesn't get results. The Green approach is much more constructive, and we'll always be willing to sit down and talk with others to find where there are genuine areas of common ground, while continuing to challenge them on issues like their addiction to the oil economy, which simply cannot last and isn't even keeping people's jobs safe any longer.
Thank you very much indeed, and it sounds like any arrangement that may be required would certainly come at a price from a Green point of view. Let's cross the country and go back to the Edinburgh count and talk with the Scottish Labour leader, Kezia Dugdale. Congratulations on your re-election, but there's no way of varnishing this, putting a gloss on it. It's a disaster for Labour tonight.
Morning, Glenn. Yes, it's a very bad night for the Labour Party. There's no question about that. I think you heard of some of what I had to say when I was elected there about what I think's happened overnight. I'll have a much better sense of analysis for you over the weekend once I've had some sleep. But there's no doubt that the Constitution has actually dominated this election campaign, and what we've seen across the country is areas of great strength for the Yes campaign, have delivered strong results for the SNP, and areas where there's a strong no vote. The Tories have benefited from that, and throughout this entire campaign I've always tried to make the case for moving on from the referendum argument of the past, trying to build that fairer, more equal Scotland with the votes of people who voted both yes and no, despite being proud to have voted no myself.
Was Paul Sinclair, a former Labour advisor, right to argue that essentially you had chased the wrong group of voters, those who were perhaps left-leaning and had left the Labour Party for the SNP instead of sticking by middle-class no voters who'd stuck with Labour?
I think in fairness to Paul, somebody who I have a high regard for, I could have done that, but that would have been a very short-term, short-lived strategy. I think for the long-term benefit of Scotland, we have to move on from the referendum arguments of the past, and that's why I wanted to build a coalition of voters of people who had voted both yes and no, that share a common belief, a common desire to tackle fairness and inequality in this country. And that's why the tax proposal I put forward I felt was so important, that idea of using the new powers of the Parliament to raise the money we need to stop the cuts. Because the reality of tonight's result, Glenn, is regardless of the way that the cards fall in the end, Scotland is faced with £3 billion worth of cuts yet to come in Scotland, unless we are prepared to use the new powers of the Parliament to make different choices. Now that leaves me very sad, because that means a lot of vulnerable people across Scotland are going to face further austerity with a chance to make a different choice, but that's not been the one that Scotland settled for tonight.
Thank you for battling to be heard over the dismantling effort. Very briefly, if I can, will you stay as Labour leader no matter what?
No matter what, 100%, I am remaining the leader of the Scottish Labour Party.
And will that be up to you?
Well, I took over this job in challenging times for my party. We fell from 41 MPs to just 1 MP. I said at the time that I was on a mission to renew the Scottish Labour Party, that I had a plan of how to do that. I asked my colleagues to step behind me with that 5-year vision for the future of the party, and they did so with 72% of the vote. I have a huge mandate to lead this party, and from all the conversations that I have had with colleagues tonight, I continue to have a huge mandate to lead this party.
Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us live from the count in Edinburgh, what's left of it. Kezia Dugdale, leader of the Scottish Labour Party. It's gone 6:30, 6:35 now, in case you're clock watching. You've got to get ready for work. Let's bring in our political panel, and we'll start with Stuart Hosey, Deputy Leader of the SNP. You've been around long enough to have lost as well as to have won. Do you feel anything for Kezia Dugdale and her colleagues this evening?
I do.
This morning?
This morning. I actually feel for everyone who's lost a seat. Because, you know, whether we agree or disagree, if people go into politics to do public service, to do good, however they see it, and they get wiped out because of a swing, nothing to do with them, of course you've got to feel for them. But at that point, the sympathy stops, because Kezia just said...
I thought there was going to be a but in this.
And I perfectly understand it. She says, you know, she wants to move on from the referendum. Now, you know, I understand that. But it's too soon for Labour simply to say, we didn't really go into bed with the Tories, we didn't really do a deal, we didn't really say all these nasty things about Scotland, let's just move on. And I'm not sure it's really the end game for Labour yet, in terms of the public saying, we're not ready to forgive you yet.
So it could get worse before it gets better if it gets better?
Well, you know, I was in the Glasgow count for a part of the evening tonight, and I saw the look on Glasgow Labour councillors' faces. I think they know what might happen next year if they don't get their act together.
I'm going to come to Charlie Jeffrey in just a moment, but Martin McCluskey for Labour. What's your diagnosis? What has gone wrong for Labour in this election after a series of bad elections?
I think you just heard it from Kez there. We ran a campaign which I think was, you know, in my view, a strong campaign, but the country isn't ready for it. We wanted to move...
A strong campaign, but the wrong campaign?
No, but the country isn't ready for the arguments that we wanted to put. So we wanted to move beyond the referendum. That clearly hasn't been successful this evening, and we can see that in the results. Now, over the next 5 years, there'll be a responsibility on the SNP, and, you know, if it is a minority government or a coalition or whatever, the government to, you know, we will be holding them to account on the same issues that we put forward in this campaign. As Kez said a moment ago, the £3 billion of cuts that we expect to see, and using the powers of the Parliament in order to alleviate the pain which we are already seeing communities across Scotland. So, you know, it's the SNP's victory this evening, and that's something I congratulate them for. And we're still obviously seeing results coming in on the regional list, but this campaign has been, you know, a campaign that's put forward a solid argument, but in my view is one that the country just wasn't ready for yet. We haven't yet moved on from the constitutional debate that we had in 2014.
Well, let's see what Professor Charlie Jeffrey has to say on that. Are we still witnessing post-referendum politics?
We certainly are. I think we're seeing the extraordinary position of Labour losing to everyone everywhere. They're losing on the left to the SNP, in particular in the west of Scotland, but they're losing across the country to the Conservatives on the unionist side of that equation. It looks very, very difficult for them to find a way back once they're being squeezed on both dimensions of Scottish politics, left, right, and union versus independence.
No matter what, Kezia Dugdale says she'll remain as Labour Party leader, Brian. Do you think that is the case? Is it up to her to make that decision?
Self-evidently, it's not up to her, in that if there's a serious challenge and the party votes otherwise, then she's gone. I don't think there'll be a serious challenge. I think that she will be left as the incumbent, because the party has to have a far more fundamental rethink than just changing the leader. Again, I've lost count of the number of leaders they've had in recent years. I suspect they have too. But it was very interesting that she said that she tried to move on and it wasn't possible. The party was going in a different direction from the electorate. When the party is going in a different direction from the electorate, guess what? You lose.
We're still waiting for results from the south of Scotland. Why are we waiting? Cameron Buttle can perhaps tell us. He's live in Kelso. What's going on, Cameron?
Well, I have to say, there's a bit of a hush falling over in the room. The counting seems to have stopped. I can see a huddle over in one corner of the hall with the Scottish Borders Council officials. There's a quiet expectation, I think, but to be honest, I think that expectation is that John Lamont is probably going to hold Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire down here. I spoke to a well-placed source within the Scottish National Party down here, and they were adamant that John had won it. And John Lamont wouldn't concede it himself. He always plays his cards very close to his chest, but they're looking pretty relaxed, the Conservatives, just now. But yeah, we're just waiting. But I mean, I suppose if the Scottish Borders Council did anticipate roughly this time in the morning, you're talking 125 polling stations, 400 boxes. They're counting 4 seats here, 2 constituencies, 2 lists. They did anticipate that this was going to take this length of time, I'm afraid.
And so how much longer?
I've absolutely no idea, to be honest with you.
Ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer, eh? Cameron, we'll be right back to you when you do have
possibly
more
Well,
news.
listen, I thought something was happening, but possibly not, sorry.
Well, it was entertaining nonetheless. Cameron Buttle live from Kelso, and we're waiting for that Ettrick result and at least one other from the south of Scotland. Professor Charlie Jeffrey, the indications there that the Conservatives would hold that seat, and that would add some extra icing and a couple of cherries to what is already a very good night for the Tories.
It certainly is. I think we've seen the recovery of the Conservative Party from the disasters of the 1990s in this election. They have won significantly from Labour, but it's very interesting to look at the northeast of Scotland as well, where the Tartan Tories, who went to the SNP, appear to be moving back. A pattern you can see also across parts of rural Scotland outside the northeast. Conservatives look to have a social base again in Scotland, which they lost.
Brian Taylor, you know, for years the Conservatives, the brand for the party has been seen by some as being toxic. Murdo Fraser, re-elected tonight, actually stood for the leadership, calling for the party to be torn up and for a new centre-right force. Is that now no longer necessary?
He was probably right at the time, given what subsequently happened to the Conservatives. I would guess that idea has probably gone the way. I was very struck by remarks that Jackson made about the nature of the Conservative approach, again, you know, referring to Annie Wells, and wasn't that a great interview that she did as well about the pitch that she is making. The Conservatives are not back and fully kicking. I mean, they're still the only party since universal suffrage to achieve a popular majority, 50.1 in a great year, 1955. But they and despite all the things, the SNP didn't do it last year. They were only just short. Tiny little thing about governing, because the SNP are currently on, what are they on? 58 seats. Christine Graham will take the Midlothian one, so that's 59. They need a further 6 off the list. They haven't got any so far, but they might pick up one in the northeast. They might pick up a couple as well, but they might fall short. If they do, will they form a coalition? Not a chance. Absolutely not a chance. 2007, remember, 3 days of anguished negotiations with the two Greens produced a concordat or something of that nature that was to be about confidence and supply. It fell apart when the Greens refused to vote for the SNP budget. I think exactly the same would happen again this time. I don't think the SNP would want to be in a coalition with the Greens at all, given the Greens' stance on tax. And I think that the SNP, if they fall short, will govern as a minority and seek to do a deal on an annual basis with regard to the budget. Who knows? It could be the return of the Conservatives, who were so influential during that 2007-11 Parliament in negotiating concessions from John Swinney over the budget.
Well, I'm not sure the Conservatives would be amenable to that sort of arrangement in this coming Parliament if, indeed, you are the the main party of opposition. Would that be a fair reading?
Oh, we will be standing as the principal party of opposition to the Scottish National
No
Party.
deals?
No. And what I think is extraordinary is none of the opinion polls before the election had us winning 2 seats in Glasgow, had us winning 4 seats in the Lothians, if you take into account Ruth Davidson's win as well, or had us winning 4 seats in Mid-Scotland and Fife. That is quite a transformation. And if the SNP now fall short of an absolute majority, I think Nicola Sturgeon's gift of deciding when and if there will be another referendum in Scotland will have been stripped from her.
Well, Glenn, just let me add this to the mix. If the SNP is short of an overall majority, there is no principal opposition party, because it doesn't require any party as a single party, even if it's 20 MSPs, 25, 5 or 8 or 9, it requires a simple majority for any legislation, for the budget. When I was the finance spokesman in the Scottish Parliament, I sat down with John Swinney. It just so happened that it was always after the Conservatives because they were very keen to vote for the SNP budget.
Well, in those circumstances, let me just ask,
Changes
Stuart
the
Hosey
mix
of the
dramatically.
SNP, it does certainly change the nature of the Parliament. Would you be looking at issue by issue, doing deals with all parties?
The First Minister, I'm assuming Nicola becomes First Minister, will certainly speak to our parliamentary group. They'll come to a decision on what the best way to proceed is. But can I just say to Jeremy, that's absolute twaddle. If the SNP were in a position, with support initially, to form a minority administration, of course there's a principal opposition to ask the questions. I think the Liberal Party, who are now sitting on the same number of seats as the Greens, can't suddenly pretend they've got 20 or 25 MSPs to be questioning the government.
You weren't in Holyrood. I sat down with John Swinney as the finance spokesman for the Liberals each year, and we had this process.
Jeremy, you weren't the principal opposition.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because you don't need. You need the numbers to get the majority, and it changes the dynamic.
Leave it there because we want to get the result from the Ettrick count.
Barry Cunning, Scottish Labour Party, 1,766. Jim Hume, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 2,551. John Lamont, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 18,257. Paul Wheelhouse, Scottish National Party, 10,521. I declare that John Lamont has been duly elected in the Scottish Parliament as the member for Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire constituency. The number of ballot papers rejected and not counted by me at this election was as follows: 88. Voting for more than one candidate.
Well, John Lamont re-elected as the Conservative MSP for Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire. I think I saw him release a little breath of relief, although it wasn't even slightly close. He won with 18,257 votes, beating the SNP's Paul Wheelhouse, a minister in the Scottish Government who now looks like he is out of the Scottish Parliament, albeit that he is on the SNP list but fairly far down. He finishes second with 10,521 votes. The Lib Dems' Jim Hume also standing on the list, third with 2,551. Labour's Barry Cunning fourth with 1,766 votes. The turnout there, 61%. So the Conservatives taking a 55% share, the SNP on 32, the Lib Dems on 8, Labour on 5. Compared to last time, the Conservatives up 10, the SNP up 5, Lib Dems down 10, Labour down 5. And a quick look at the swing from the SNP to the Conservatives, a 2% swing. The Conservatives hold Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire, and there's only one more constituency seat to declare. Let's look at the picture overall now with Jackie Bird.
One more to go. It's been a hugely successful night for the SNP. Now, as expected, they've streaked ahead in the constituency seats, winning 58 of the 72 declared so far. Now, it's been a good night, too, for Scotland's Conservative, not just in Ettrick, as we heard there. They added to their constituencies and from the list and could emerge as the main opposition party. It could be their best performance north of the border since 1992. The Lib Dems held on to Orkney and Shetland and added another 2 to their constituency tally. The Greens have 4 list seats so far and could end up being kingmakers if the SNP failed to achieve that overall majority. The co-convener of the Greens, Patrick Harvey, said it had been a good night for them.
What's clear is that we've managed to gain huge momentum, certainly in Glasgow, where we came second in Glasgow Kelvin. That's the closest we've ever come to winning a constituency, and I'm told that it's the closest that anybody's come to challenging the SNP in any constituency in Glasgow. So we've gained momentum, we've gained a lot of profile, I think, during this campaign, and we've certainly gained the expertise and the experience of getting our campaigners and volunteers out there on a scale that we've never seen before. So it's momentum that we'll continue to build on.
Now, no doubt that
It has been a dismal night for Labour. The party lost ground to the SNP and to the Conservatives. And the party's leader, Kezia Dugdale, was the only main party leader not to win a constituency seat, but who will return to Holyrood courtesy of the regional list seat. This is what she had to say.
This election was always going to be tough for the Scottish Labour Party, just a year after a painful general election defeat. But I am proud that our campaign rose to the challenge of offering an alternative vision for what could be done in our new, more powerful Parliament.
And Kezia Dugdale says she will not stand down as leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Now let's take a quick look at some of the front pages this fine morning. The Daily Record, well, 5 more years, and Nicola is on the front of the Edinburgh Evening News with beaming Ruth Davidson there. And finally on Twitter, Nicola Sturgeon found the time to congratulate Leanne Wood on winning the Rhondda seat for Plaid Cymru. Glenn.
Thanks very much indeed, Jackie. It's 10 minutes to 7 on Friday morning, and we're waiting for one more constituency declaration in the Scottish Parliament election, and we've got 3 of the regional results already declared, the rest still to come, completing the Scottish Parliament picture. Let's see what the picture looks like right now with David Henderson.
Glenn, it's a good moment to take stock. The SNP have shown themselves to be the dominant force in Scottish politics in recent years. This morning, they're close to a majority in the Scottish Parliament. It would be a historic triumph, but they need to make it over that finishing line of 65 seats to gain an overall majority in this place. This is how the Parliament chamber is filling up. Almost all of the constituencies and 3 of the 8 regions have now declared their results. So many of the MSPs who will occupy these seats for the next 5 years have been confirmed. Well, a large chunk of SNP yellow here. They're on 58 seats. Remember, they need 65 for a majority. The Conservatives over here currently in second place on 16 seats. On the other side of the SNP, there's Labour with just 11 seats so far. The Liberal Democrats and the Greens on 4 seats each. Now, many had thought an SNP majority was the most likely outcome of this election, but as we can see, that's not guaranteed yet. Let's take a look at why. Well, let's look at the change in the party's seat allocation compared to the last election. There we go. The SNP has gained 6 seats. The Tories have gained 4, and the Liberal Democrats have gained 2. You can see Labour there have had a terrible night. They've lost a lot of ground, 12 seats in total. Well, let's have a look at where the SNP have gained ground tonight. Here we go. They've won at the expense of Labour. Right here, those yellow flashing seats. They now belong to the SNP. They were Labour seats. All of them through the Central Belt, most of them in the west of Scotland. But the SNP have also lost some seats too, 5 in all. 3 of them in Edinburgh, 1 in Fife, 1 there in Aberdeenshire. They're now flashing in the colours of the winner. So, this is the state of play at this stage of the morning. 1 constituency yet to declare, that's Midlothian South, Tweeddale and Lauderdale. And, of course, there are many regional results still to come. Those are in grey on our regional results grid here. The SNP need 7 more MSPs to win a majority. Will they get them? Or will they need to seek the support of other parties in the chamber? Could it be the Greens? We'll soon find out. Glenn, back to you.
Thanks very much indeed for the moment, David. Let's cross to Aberdeen now. Our reporter there is Stephen Duff. What have you got for us, Stephen?
Well, Glenn, we're still waiting for the North East regional list to be declared, estimated about 7:30, we're told. I'm joined now by Alex Johnson, who is top of the list for the Conservatives. You've also had a constituency count tonight. First of all, how did it get on?
I missed it by about 2,500 in Angus North and Mearns.
OK. Well, just tell us about the revival of the Tories winning constituencies.
Well, we really are enjoying the opportunity to go back and win constituencies. We've won several tonight, and we've won one in the North East here with Alexander Burnett taking West Aberdeenshire. And that's a tremendous step forward for us. We've been strong in the North East, but we haven't had a constituency. Now we've got one. That's a genuine foothold, and we really will use that to make progress from now on.
West Aberdeenshire is quite an interesting one because Labour have never done well there. Where were you getting votes from there, do you think?
I think there is a strong traditional Conservative vote that has drifted off in several directions over generations. And what we're doing now is focusing people's minds back on what their core priorities are, and people who are instinctively Conservatives want to vote Conservative. And that's what happened in West Aberdeenshire.
Are you the new Tartan Tories? The new Tartan Tory party?
Well, we are a distinctively Scottish party, and I think it is obvious that Ruth Davidson has set out to achieve that. And I think that's part of the transformation that we've gone through. We are genuinely Scottish people, a Scottish party with Scottish values and a Scottish job to do. And that's why the people of Scotland have realised that the Conservatives can do a job for them and have started voting for them in this election in significantly increased numbers.
And do you now expect to spend most of your time defending, answering for decisions of the Tory government in Westminster?
Well, strangely enough, that's not something we often have to do.
Well, you've complained about that to me in the past. You're always having to defend.
We will defend the actions of the government in the South, but we are distinctively Scottish, and we have the right, if we require it, to make different decisions about how we implement policies in Scotland. And Ruth Davidson has taken that power, and she has produced a manifesto that is designed for Scotland and will work for Scotland. She is going to provide the opposition that has been lacking in Scotland. Tonight, the SNP will probably end up as the largest party and will continue in government, but they will have a strong opposition in the Conservative Party that will actually try to change their direction.
OK, Alex Johnson, thank you very much. The Conservatives hoping for 2, maybe 3 seats when the North East list is declared. We're expecting that, at least estimate, as I say, about 7:30.
Thank you very much indeed. And the North East list is one of 5 still to declare. 5 sevens are what, 35 MSPs to come in from those lists, plus 1 constituency still to come as well. But at this stage, it is clear that the SNP has won the election, won an historic 3rd term. Far less clear that they'll win it with an overall majority and may find themselves having to make deals to get their business done in the next Parliament. The Conservatives looking increasingly likely to be the main opposition party, displacing Labour, and still a battle between the Liberal Democrats and the Greens for 4th place. Let's cross live now to Holyrood, to the Scottish Parliament for the first time this morning, and say good morning, Shelley Joffrey.
Good morning, and it's a beautiful morning here in Holyrood in Edinburgh. This is obviously where a lot of the newbies and familiar faces are going to be coming on Monday morning to start settling into their job for the next 5 years. We don't know exactly how the chamber is going to look at the moment, but here with me to discuss the results as they stand is Alan Convery from Edinburgh University. Hi, Alan.
Good morning.
I mean, obviously a very good night for the SNP. Perhaps not enough, though, to form a majority government?
That's right, it has been a very good night for the SNP. We just don't know quite how good, so we're less certain of the SNP forming a majority and getting to that magic 65 number. So we definitely know the SNP will be in government. We just don't know quite the form of that government. Will it be another SNP majority government or some kind of minority government again?
Well, the big battle is for 2nd place. List results still coming in, but it's looking like a very good night for the Conservatives.
That's right. I think the Conservatives have had a really excellent night and have picked up seats they perhaps didn't expect as well. So Ruth Davidson fought a very disciplined campaign about presenting herself as a credible opposition and also presenting herself as a unionist alternative opposition to the SNP. And the Conservatives, I think, will be very pleased with the result, and especially if, as now looks somewhat likely, they come ahead of Labour to be the main opposition party in the Scottish Parliament.
Well, we've heard Kezia Dugdale saying that she thinks that they've lost out overnight because they tried to take on move the constitutional debate on from the referendum and talk about other issues. Do you think that that's what these results tell us?
I think there are several things here. I think it'd be wrong to read into it's purely a problem with this election. I think Labour's problems go much further back to 2007 when they lost, that failure to renew themselves in opposition. But perhaps there's also been discussion already of short-term factors in this election about was it right to place themselves to the left of the SNP by advocating increases in taxes. And I think that's a debate the Labour Party will need to have.
It's looking like a good night for the Greens as well. Already they've picked up 4 MSPs from the list. They could become quite influential if it is a minority government.
That's right. I mean, potentially the SNP will be looking for the support of the Greens on some measures if it is a minority government. The Greens will also want to have influence in the various committees in Parliament as well. And the Greens, what we don't know yet about the Greens is whether they'll come ahead of the Liberal Democrats as well, which will also be a good result for the Scottish Green Party in this election.
What sort of night do you think it is for the Liberal Democrats?
Well, the Liberal Democrats have hung on to their seats in Orkney and Shetland. I think it's been a good night for Willie Rennie personally, who's won his seat in North East Fife. And I think it's shown that the Lib Dems fight a really solid, good constituency campaign, and they can hang on. So I think it could have been a great deal worse than Lib Dems, and I think it's certainly gone reasonably well for them.
So any big surprises so far as you've looked at the results coming in? I know you've been up all night.
I think there's been some pleasing results. So Willie Rennie's result has been particularly pleasing for him, I think. Also for the Conservatives, winning back Eastwood, so throughout a long period was a traditional Tory seat. And to win that back, I think, has been personally very good for Jackson Carlow and for the Conservatives as well. A Tory seat, a natural Tory seat, you might have thought that they've now managed to win back.
And we haven't heard anything about UKIP. Have they just not really figured in this election?
Yeah, we haven't heard anything about UKIP. I haven't looked at the latest figures, but it appears that they might not get a seat, and that's, of course, in contrast to Wales, where UKIP have done much better in this election.
OK, Alan Convery, and that's it for now from the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh.
Thanks very much. We'll be right back to you throughout the remainder of the programme. It's just gone 7 o'clock on Friday, the 6th of May. You're watching BBC Scotland's continuing coverage of the Scottish Parliament elections. It's clear at this stage that the SNP has won, far less clear that they'll finish with an overall majority, which may mean deal-making for Nicola Sturgeon and her team as they move towards a third term in government for the SNP. Probably no deals with the Conservatives. They seem to be emerging as the main party of opposition, having displaced the Labour Party, pushing them into third place. Kezia Dugdale, the Labour leader, has conceded the election and congratulated Nicola Sturgeon, but made clear that she has no intention of giving up as Labour leader. Now, let's cross to Dingwall. In Dingwall, you can see that there is some movement as we move towards the regional list declaration for the Highlands and Islands. That appears to be the Conservative group of candidates and activists for the Highland list. It's one of 5 regional lists still to declare. We've had 3 so far, 5 still to go. And in each of those regions, celebrations where there are winners and obviously commiserations where would-be MSPs lose out. So the Highlands and Islands declaration, we think, is imminent, and obviously news of what is about to be declared appears to be filtering out to the candidates and their teams at the count in Dingwall. At this stage, let's bring in our political panel, and we've got a new member, a new representative for the Scottish Labour Party, Anna Sarwar, who's made a political comeback at this election. You lost your seat in Glasgow at the Westminster election just a year ago, but you're back as a regional MSP for Glasgow. Feel good to be back in politics, frontline?
I'm the youngest veteran in politics, I think, in terms of some of the things that's happening in the politics. Look, it's extremely challenging, but for me it's a huge honour to represent the city in which I was born and brought up, and a huge honour to try and working alongside my other Labour colleagues to resurrect and rebuild our Labour Party and our Labour movement.
You've been a deputy leader of the party in the past. You've been through a few scrapes in that role, and as an MSP, you've won and you've lost. But tonight, it's a special kind of defeat for the Labour Party. I mean, this is the worst ever result in a national election in Scotland, as far as we can tell. How on earth do you start rebuilding from here?
I think last year was obviously difficult for us, and this year is no different. It's a very difficult election. I think what makes it slightly different this time from last year is I don't think we need to go through some of the things we had to go through last year in terms of re-looking at our policy programme, looking at what we stood for, who we stood with. I think Kes has made that very, very clear in this election campaign, and I actually think we have a very strong manifesto from which we can build in terms of doing opposition to the Nationalists and indeed to the Tories in this Parliament.
You think you fought the right campaign with the right policies?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think the challenge we have is I think Kes Dugdale was saying the right things and the Labour Party was saying the right things. I think the honest reality is that people aren't willing to listen to us at the moment, and that's a much harder truth, I think, for the Labour Party in this election campaign. We've got to win the right to be listened to again in Scotland, and that's not happened in this election.
But isn't it possible people listened and just didn't like what you had to say?
Well, the polls don't show that. The polls show that the two
polls show that you've beaten.
No, the polls clearly show that we got beaten tonight. I'm not trying to negate that at all. But if you look at the polls around the policies and which policies were popular, which ones weren't, clearly there was popularity for the 50p tax ban policy. Clearly there was popularity for the basic rate of income tax to actually fund public services. But the reality is that did not translate into people trusting us to deliver that and trusting us with a vote. And that's a much more fundamental problem for us than the policy programme itself.
But you've lost substantial amounts of support to the Conservative Party, for instance. In a seat like Eastwood, Jackson Carlaw is now the MSP, and your guy was dumped down into third place. Is he reading it right from your point of view, Jackson Carlaw?
I think this is the same sort of denial that the Conservatives were in 1997, if I'm being frank, where we thought it was just very unfortunate that people hadn't properly understood what we were all about, and if we just spoke a little bit more plainly to people, it would all turn around.
Worse than that.
I think the reality is, as Glenn said, the policy programme was listened to and it's been rejected. And it depends which opinion poll you look at. There were opinion polls that said that 69% of people did not want taxes to be higher in Scotland than they are in England. So, that contradicts the idea that there was a great mandate for people paying additional tax. And in any event, as I've found in a very long time in politics, people will sometimes say one thing to opinion posters, and then when they're actually asked to go into the ballot box and vote for higher taxes, they have second thoughts.
But the point I'm making, Glenn, which is a much more fundamental problem for the Labour Party, is whatever we said, the point I'm making about people not listening is I think whatever we said, we have a problem in terms of connecting with certain parts of the electorate for them even listening to what we've got to say. And that's a much more fundamental problem for us as a party. And I think that's the realisation. So I think tinkering around the edges around manifestos or even talking about individuals and personalities actually misses the point.
OK, what do you need to do then? Number one.
Look, one, I think Kes has done the right thing in terms of defining what we stand for and who we stand with. I think we've rightly started talking about how we use the powers of the Parliament rather than talking about the referendum question. I think we're, to be honest, ahead of that. I don't think the country is there yet. I think the country is still thinking about the context of the referendum, the yes and no question. We tried to move past that yes or no question in this election campaign. That was difficult for us. But we've got to rebuild that trust in individual communities and individual cities right across this country.
Well, one thing we haven't really picked up on since the picture started to become clearer that the SNP win might not include that overall majority. Without that, there's not going to be an independence referendum in the next 5 years.
Well, there's not going to be an independence referendum unless and until the Scottish people want one. That's the key thing. And
no, I understood, but the lesson from the 2007-11 Parliament, where the SNP actually went in promising a referendum, was that you couldn't have had one if you wanted to. You would have been outvoted.
Well, indeed, democracy is a wonderful thing. Although I would just urge a little caution to my friends, particularly in the Labour Party. We've seen what happened to them, having gone into bed with the Tories and said no to things, whatever it was, for too long. Imagine if the Scottish people decide, and they tell pollsters for a year or 2 or 3 by an overwhelming majority, they want a referendum and they want to vote yes. Are we really going to have the Labour Party once again, well, let me finish the sentence, once again jump into bed with the Tories and say no to the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland. Now, I think this is a very serious and real challenge for Labour, and it's all good and well saying you want to move on from the constitutional question, but I think you have to understand what it means. It's about the people being sovereign, not the Labour Party.
Let me flip that question.
Let's have a brief word from Anna.
Just say in 2 years' time, and as much as we hope this has happened and it's going to be challenging, the opinion polls change and look like there's a majority support for a different political party. We won't be rerunning the election on that basis. Mandates come from the electorate in an election. They don't come from pollsters. John Curtis shouldn't decide when the next referendum is. It should be the people of Scotland that decide when the next referendum is.
All right. We'll make sure that Jeremy Purvis gets a say the next time we come to the panel. But right now, I want to cross back to our election cafe. Fiona Stalker is there and with some new guests, Fiona.
Indeed, yes. And they've been going all night, still going strong, lots of coffee being taken. Now, there's no show without punch, and there's no election campaign without social media. Angela Haggerty, who writes a column on social media at the Sunday Herald, is here, and Ross McCafferty from the digital desk at the Daily Record. Well done for staying with us all night. Angela, you've had a look at some of the trends on social media. What have you noticed?
It's kind of difficult to get trends, I think, when you're doing the overnight coverage, because it's really just the results coming through and people starting to get very quick reactions to it. But I think there's been some surprise at some of those early results. In Orkney and Shetland, I think people expected, but they certainly didn't expect such a big Lib Dem return, I don't think. There's been some surprise at the increase in the Tory vote, I think, as well. And just recently, I think, with the Greens regional votes coming out, I think there's been some excitement around that sort of stuff, in particular Andy Whiteman being elected. I think there's been quite a lot of chat around that. So it's just, I think you tend to get more reaction coming through once you've got a fuller picture of the results, and then you start to see some more themes emerging about what the issues are going to be.
Well, we've still got some of the regional results still to come, Ross, but you've been keeping a very close eye on social media overnight. What have you seen?
It's been one of the things that I've found most interesting just very recently has been a little bit of acrimony between the SNP and the Greens, which might start to be interesting if it comes to a potential coalition between the two of them if the SNP fall short of the majority. I think there was the instant reaction which they might regret from the SNP was one of anger in Edinburgh Central when Tory leader Ruth Davidson won, because the Green vote, that was one of only, I think, 3 constituencies the Greens stood in. Alison Johnson had a great performance from her point of view. She got around 4,600 votes. Of course, Ruth Davidson's majority was only 600. So I think there was a suggestion from the SNP there that maybe their independents supporting colleagues in the Green Party might have considered not bothering standing in that seat. Having said that, the Greens have slightly got their own back now as far as a Twitter back and forth goes, because 100,000 SNP regional votes in Glasgow have effectively come to nothing, and the implication from the Greens there is that the relentless both votes SNP strategy has possibly starved the Greens and by extension the pro-independence movement of another list MSP in Glasgow.
Well, it's interesting talking about things like the hashtag both votes SNP or both votes Labour. Angela, do you think they make much of a difference? Do you think people will look at them on social media and go, yep, both votes SNP or both votes Labour?
I don't think the hashtags themselves really influence how somebody's going to vote, but in terms of building momentum and getting a message out and just keeping that message going really, really strongly, I think that's been quite useful. But as Ross says, that's been one of the areas of conflict that we've seen, and what has been otherwise quite a boring election for social media when you compare it to the independence referendum and the general election. There has been conflict within the pro-independence bloc over how they're going to split their votes, or if they should split their votes. So that will be interesting, I think, in the aftermath of the election, once we've got all the results through, to see how those relationships on social media progress now, and whether they break down a little bit further, or whether you start to see some sort of the election's over and it's back to business for the pro-independence people.
Well, over the campaign as a whole, Ross, who do you think did it well and who did it less well?
Well, it depends on whether you're reflecting on their own output, because party propaganda, even on social media, is by its very nature quite dry and quite, it's quite a stale message almost. But to me, it was the more that you can cut through to people who you might not reach, and possibly Ruth Davidson was the best example of that. Willie Rennie as well. I mean, he said in his speech that he had the time of his life during this election campaign. It's like a bucket list, wasn't it? And I don't think anyone could disagree with that. He just looked like he was having a great time, and possibly that, just this an enthusiastic leader perhaps makes it easier to believe this. I think maybe 2015 they were still just coming out of that coalition, and it was this belief that, you know, the message was the Lib Dem fight back and the Lib Dems fighting back, but that never really showed. Whereas when you've got someone like Willie Rennie who just so believes it and it's just shining out of his eyes, then I don't know if that's possibly had some cut through, especially in his own constituency where he shocked everyone really, possibly even himself.
Well, I'm sure there'll be some tweets from him to have a look at this morning. Anyway, thank you both to my guests. And remember, if you want to take part in the social media conversation, then please do. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll let you know the trends. Just use the hashtag SB16.
Thanks, Fiona. One constituency seat to declare, and we're still waiting, of course, for those important regional lists from 5 regions across Scotland. But at this stage, Charlie Jeffrey, it does look increasingly difficult for the SNP to achieve an overall majority. What's your calculation?
It does. There's one more constituency to declare, which I think the SNP will win. It looks as if 5 more seats on the list is the most likely outcome. 2 in the Highlands and Islands, 2 in the south, 1 in the northeast. Could be 1 more, could be 1 less, but that puts it really just one or 2 short.
And in those circumstances, Brian Taylor, I suppose with the support of Greens, the independence issue could actually come back into play, but on a day-to-day basis, that requires deals to get things done.
It does. I mean, a couple of things on that. First of all, the question of the presiding officer is going to be rather important in the next Parliament. There had been a forecast that Bruce Crawford of the SNP could be in the running for that job. If the SNP are short of an overall majority, they are not going to want to give up one of their number to that post. That was the case in 2007 to 11 when it was Alex Ferguson from the Conservatives who stepped into the breach and filled that role when the SNP were reluctant to allow one of their number to take the post of PO. Then you have the business of deals. Now, I have some sympathy actually with Jeremy Purvis earlier, who was getting slapped around the head when it was about who was forming the principal opposition. It's not.
Not literally. For those who've maybe just woken up and just joined us, there was no physical violence.
Yeah, for those of you who just joined us, you missed the head slapping. It was quite the finest moment of the programme. No, the other guy. No, but okay, there is a principal opposition party generally, just the biggest. But the others can be influential. I recall again in that 7 to 11 Parliament, it was Jeremy Purvis, it was Andy Kerr, and it was Derek Brownlee for the Conservatives. And they each tried to strike deals, and Margaret MacDonald, the independent, managed to get something every year. I think she got something on for a ski slope one year out of John Swinney, because John Swinney needed every single vote, because it's the budget that counts. But of course, there'll be some small matters of getting legislation through, not least, as you rightly point out, a legislation for a referendum, should one be proposed, although I think at the present moment Nicola Sturgeon is less than inclined to propose one.
Let's bring in our political panel again. We didn't hear last time from Jeremy Purvis, who was not literally slapped around the head in advancing the case that he made a little bit earlier. We're waiting for list results which could determine whether or not your party finishes 4th or indeed 5th in this election. Now, the first 3, there was a squeeze on from your point of view. You didn't get anything from those. Are you going to pick up enough to stay ahead of the Greens?
Well, we'll see. I think one of the way that the system operates, as we've been discussing, is the perverse element. Because we've been successful in gaining mainland constituencies, that works against us in the regions where we've been successful. So we'll see. But if I may come back to on the element if the SNP don't have an overall majority, because these are no longer spending budgets. These are tax-raising budgets. And there will be no opposition from the Conservatives on the tax-raising budgets from the SNP, because they are agreed. Both parties have agreed not to raise any of the rates. So where will the opposition be? Where will the dynamic be when it comes to the ongoing budgets now in a minority government situation, when the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats have a different position, and the Labour Party? The dynamic is going to be very different, but fundamentally, I think that if the SNP lose an overall majority in this election, that is a material change of circumstances when it comes to the independence referendum question.
Quoting Nicola Sturgeon's phrase back at her.
It is a material change of circumstances against another referendum if the SNP lose an overall majority, which they could well be doing this morning.
Word on that from you, Stuart Hosey?
Well, one could make a similar argument to say if the Greens poll, let's say, twice as many seats as the Lib Dems, and there's a clear independent supporting majority, that would be the same argument in reverse. Now, I'm not going to make that argument today. I'm just not going to do it. I think we should maybe stick to what's at hand, the results yet to come in, how the list votes are going to break down before we get into the realms of what might happen once we've got all the votes counted.
Well, I wonder if we're about to get another round of list results from the Highlands and Islands.
Scottish parliamentary election.
Yeah, here it is.
Regional list for the Highlands and Islands. With an electorate of 348,303, the total votes cast in the regional list were 205,683, which is a turnout of 59.1%. And the votes cast for each of the parties and candidates is as follows. Rise, 889. Scottish Christian Party, 3,407. Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 44,693. Scottish Green Party, 14,781. Scottish Labour Party, 22,894. Scottish Liberal Democrats, 27,223. Scottish National Party, 81,600. Solidarity, 793. UK Independence Party, 5,344. James Stockan, 3,689. There were 370 votes rejected, and therefore I declare that the following candidates are duly elected to serve as members of the Scottish Parliament for the Highlands and Islands region. Douglas Ross, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Rhoda Grant, Scottish Labour Party. Edward Mountain, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Donald Cameron, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. John Finney, Scottish Green Party. Marie Todd, Scottish National Party. And David Stewart, Scottish Labour Party.
So that's the Highlands and Islands list. All 7 seats declared, 3 for the Conservatives. We'll recap in a moment. Let's get the Central Scotland list.
Is as follows. Rise, Respect, Independence, Socialism and Environmentalism Party, 106. Scottish Christian Party proclaiming Christ's Lordship, 248. Scottish Conservative Unionist Party, 4,270. Scottish Green Party, 880. Scottish Labour Party, 7,029. Scottish Liberal Democrats, 423. Scottish National Party, 12,646. Solidarity, Scotland's Socialist Movement, 279. UK Independence Party, 730. Derek Beaumont, Independent, 35. Total, 26,646. Ballot papers rejected, 26. Total number of votes, 26,672. In terms of the Motherwell Wishaw constituency, Rise, Respect, Independence, Socialism and Environmentalism Party, 389.
I think what's happening is that the returning officer for the Central Scotland regional list is actually going through the total number of list votes that have been cast in each of the parliamentary constituencies in that region. And as that is going to take a wee while, we'll keep monitoring it and we'll come back to him when he's ready to declare the outcome of the Central Scotland list. So let's go back to the Highlands and Islands list. We heard that in full, but let's just confirm the details of it for you. The Conservatives have won 3 seats there with Douglas Ross, Edward Mountain and Donald Cameron, all new members of the Scottish Parliament. Parliament at this election, and the Conservatives up from 2 seats to 3. Labour's Rhoda Grant and David Stewart have been re-elected to Holyrood on the Highlands and Islands list, maintaining Labour's count of 2 seats. It's a breakthrough for the Greens. John Finney has been elected for them. He served in the last Parliament on the Highlands and Islands list, but was elected as an SNP member and then left the party and sat as an independent because he disagreed with the SNP's stance on NATO, their position change on NATO. And last but not least, in the Highlands and Islands, the SNP have picked up 1 seat for Marie Todd, another new member at Holyrood. They had 3 last time around, but they've been squeezed this time because of their success in the constituency votes. Now, there are potential issues affecting the list in the northeast of Scotland. Let's see if we can get a little bit more detail on that from our reporter in Aberdeen, Stephen Duff. Stephen.
Glenn, quite a strange situation here at Robert Gordon University Sports Hall. We should have been getting the declaration for the North East region list in about 5 minutes' time. That's not going to be happening. That's a recount, a partial recount that's going on. It was announced about 20 minutes or so that by the Deputy Returning Officer that there had been possible irregularities in the counting. Now, we've since found out the SNP have complained after finding out that a relative of Lewis MacDonald, who is a Labour candidate in Aberdeen Central, was counting in Aberdeen Central. The relative was then moved to the Aberdeen Donside count, but then she was allowed to count for the Aberdeen Donside list. Now, Lewis MacDonald is also on the list for the North East. So the SNP have complained. The Deputy Returning Officer says there's no doubts that there hasn't been an issue, but it's just to make sure that everything is done in a proper way. So it's going to be some time yet until we get this North East region list.
Those are words that I don't want to hear at this time in the morning, Stephen, but I suppose we can't blame you. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us that update. And let's get an update on the election overall from Jackie Bird.
Thank you, Glenn. Why can't we blame Stephen Duff? That's what I want to know. Well, a new day, but is it a new dawn for Scotland's political parties? Well, let's take a look at where the parties stand right now with some seats to declare. We've got 59 for the SNP. They've gained 1. Conservatives, huge figure for them, 19. Labour down there on 13. They have lost 13 seats. Scottish Greens on 5. They're very pleased with that, plus 3. Lib Dems on 4. They gained 1, and of course, we don't have an independent. So that's how it's sitting at the moment. The SNP, you will recall, needs 65 seats for an overall majority at Holyrood. Nicola Sturgeon told us earlier that she was optimistic they could achieve it, but that she didn't take it for granted.
It was always going to be a big ask to win a majority in a PR system. We broke the system the last time. Of course, we hope to do it again this time, but we can't take anything for granted. And we've said that throughout this campaign. That's why we put so much emphasis on our both votes SNP strategy. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but we'll have to wait and see how the rest of the results develop.
We have another list now from Central. Let's hear it.
Scottish Labour. Mark Griffin, Scottish Labour. Graham Simpson, Conservative. Elaine Smith, Scottish Labour. And Alison Harris, Conservative. The total number of votes given for each individual candidate of the registered party was as follows. Rise, Respect, Independence, Socialism and Environmentalism, Scotland's Left Alliance.
OK, let's just confirm the results from the Central Scotland list. We just came in as it was already underway. It's a very straightforward split. 4 Labour MSPs, 3 Conservatives. Labour's Richard Leonard, Monica Lennon, Mark Griffin and Elaine Smith elected for the Labour Party. The Conservative MSPs are Margaret Mitchell, Graham Simpson and Alison Harris. And just to be clear, the last time around, the Conservatives had just 1 seat. They've picked up an extra 2. The SNP last time around had 3 seats in central Scotland. This time they've got none, again because of their performance in the constituencies and, of course, the vote that they received in central Scotland. Labour up 1 from 3 seats to 4. So that's the central Scotland result. And you're seeing on your screen some of the other parties that stood on the central Scotland list. No prizes for them. The UK Independence Party and some of the smaller socialist parties and others. OK, let's go back to our political panel just to digest the results we've just had. And let's start with you, Jackson Carlaw, because you seem particularly surprised at picking up not 1, not 2, but 3 seats in central Scotland.
Glenn, a second was, an ambition. A third was really not in our radar tonight at all. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, I think, for us to pick up 3 seats in central region. And I think what we are seeing, as I suggested earlier on, that uplift in the constituency vote really seriously understated the whole success of the Conservative strategy and Ruth Davidson's appeal to the wider Scottish electorate to trust her with their regional vote. And it looks as if all across Scotland people are doing exactly that.
OK, well, the BBC is now in a position to forecast the final outcome of the election. And the forecasting team, including Professor John Curtis, predicts that the SNP will finish with 63 seats in the Scottish Parliament. That's 2 short of the overall majority that they've enjoyed over the course of the last parliamentary term. The Conservatives would finish in 2nd place, according to this prediction, with 31 seats. Now, that would be a record result for the Conservatives, their best ever by far, and crucially, it would mean they finish in 2nd place in the Scottish Parliament, becoming the main party of opposition. Not the official opposition, because we don't have that term at Holyrood in the way that we do at Westminster, but certainly the 2nd place party and the largest party of opposition, pushing Labour into 3rd place with 24 seats, according to the BBC prediction. And the battle for 4th place, the Greens edge it with 6 seats, according to this BBC forecast, pushing the Liberal Democrats into 5th place at Holyrood with a final tally of 5 seats. Now, I should underline that this is a prediction, a forecast, but it is a forecast that comes with just a small number, relatively small number of seats still to declare. Brian Taylor.
Yeah, it's first thing to point out is a forecast at 7:31 a.m. is not exactly what one might brand courageous, but welcome nonetheless. At 63 seats, they fall short. They might be able to form a pact with the Greens for the various reasons I explained earlier, which was that they didn't find them particularly helpful in 2007-11. The tax policies of the Greens are even more inimical to the SNP position as set out in their manifesto than those of the other parties. And frankly, they got used to governing as a minority from 2007 to 11. And my guess is very, very, very firmly they will seek to do that again, reaching accommodation on individual issues, on individual bills, and above all, on the budget, doing an individual deal with the various other parties involved. And I stress, the various other parties involved, not just the prime opposition party, which looks like being the Conservatives.
But if this is how it ends up, Charlie Jeffrey, we're looking at, to some extent, something of a rainbow parliament, certainly a confirmed 5-party political system, because each and every one of those parties would be entitled to form a group in the Scottish Parliament with the rights that go with that.
Indeed, and I think that makes the calculations about how a government, presumably led by Nicola Sturgeon, will get its work through. It's not like 2007, when the SNP was then quite a small minority. It's a really big minority, only just short. So it only needs to work with one party at a time. Last time it needed to work with at least 2 parties to get anything done. It puts it in a really strong position, especially when you hold the financial strings, as John Swinney no doubt will be doing.
Well, let's go back to our political panel, because it's not just the Greens that would be in a position to do deals with a Scottish government short of a majority to this extent. The Liberal Democrats could too. You're firmly opposed to the SNP's position on the Constitution, but would that preclude deals on other areas to get some of your business done at Holyrood?
Well, I'd repeat what I'd said earlier, that if the SNP have lost an overall majority, I think that is a material change of circumstances for the independence question. But on the programme of government over the next 5 years, if your forecast at 7:30 in the morning is accurate, then we would be constituting a group in the Scottish Parliament led by Willie Rennie, the 5 MSPs that many people predicted we would almost have wipeout. I think he's done a remarkable job.
That's the number you have had in the last Parliament.
And
5.
it punched very considerably above its weight on nurseries, on centralisation, on police. Willie's, I think, made his name for that. And there will be every indication that he will actually be emboldened to go and try and deliver as much as our progressive manifesto as possible.
So you would be open to deal-making on your agenda with the SNP?
When I was in the Scottish Parliament, we tried to work progressively with others. But what I think is going to be really interesting is if the SNP want to get their tax freeze through, they're going to have to rely on Conservative votes for this, which is going to be a very interesting dynamic in the Scottish Parliament.
Now, you say a material change of circumstances on the Constitution, but the only material change, according to these numbers, is that it isn't just the SNP that would provide a majority for independence in the Parliament. It would be the SNP together with the Greens that would provide that.
The SNP majority government, which put forward the referendum, which has argued, and many people predicted, an even bigger majority in this election at the start of this evening, when I was doing the broadcast at the start. If this forecast is correct, they've lost the majority. That has to be considered as a material change of circumstances for the largest party in Scotland. Now, I congratulate them for doing that. It's a remarkable result. But what is a material change of circumstances is that the majority government has lost its majority.
That appears to be the outcome of this election, an historic third term for the SNP, but a loss of your overall majority, and that's a setback.
If the BBC's assessment is correct, that's where we are. As the First Minister said, as I've said many times over the last 12 hours, to win a majority with this system in the first place is hard. To try and repeat that is extremely difficult indeed. Now, if it moves to a minority government situation, I'm sure two things will happen. One is the SNP will work with other parties in order to make sure legislation gets through. But of course, more importantly, much of what government doesn't require legislation. It requires different sorts of actions and decision making. And I think we saw that in the 2007 government extremely well indeed. So let's just wait and see what the final numbers look like. I think they're going to be pretty close to this. But just to kind of correct Jeremy on one thing when he talks about a tax freeze policy, we want to take more people out of tax at the bottom end than the current UK government want to do. We want to increase the 40p threshold by inflation, but not the above inflation rate that the UK Tory Chancellor wanted. So I think Jeremy's simply got his technical facts wrong again, as usual.
It's uncosted at the final year, and as far as the rates for income tax, the only parties that agree on the rates of income tax is the SNP and the Conservatives.
OK, well, I don't want to get into that in any more detail. I'll come back to Anna Sawar and Jackson Carlo. I want to hear a little bit more from David Henderson on the results so far. David.
Well, Glenn, we now have that prediction from the BBC of the overall result for Scotland. This is a prediction covering the constituencies and also those regional seats. Remember, this isn't a result, but an indication of likely seats based on the results we have so far. Let's see what the Scottish Parliament chamber would look like if that prediction proves correct. We would see the SNP with 63 seats. The next biggest party, this block of blue over here, that's the Conservatives with 31 seats. And then Labour on 24 seats. That's them in red. The Greens there on 6 and the Liberal Democrats on 5. But the bottom line is this. If this prediction is right, the SNP fails to win an overall majority. while the Conservatives will displace Labour as the second party in Scotland. The SNP back in control at Holyrood with Nicola Sturgeon back at the helm as First Minister of Scotland, but it would be a minority government. Remember, this is just a prediction at this stage from the BBC, but a fascinating insight into how the results may stack up by later in the morning, based on what we've seen so far.
Thanks, David. Back to our political panel, Anna Sarwar of the Labour Party. When you see it like that, it really demonstrates the shift that we're witnessing in Scottish politics. The Conservative with a much bigger bloc than they've ever had before, and Labour down to something of a rump compared to what you've been used to in the past.
Look, it's very grim reading and very devastating even seeing that graphic. It would be the honest assessment. It's a very difficult night, and one plus point from it, and we're looking for plus points, is in Richard Leonard and Monica Lennon, our two new MSPs. We'll have two really energetic, enthusiastic, passionate new elected members that'll be fighting for that.
Not a retread like you, as somebody described you earlier in this programme. Somebody other than me.
No, Jackson, in fairness, Jackson apologised for that when I came in. If I'm retread, then I think
He didn't apologise on air.
I think I look a lot younger and sharper than Jackson, but that might not be a compliment. The interesting thing, Boyd, that we were talking about the lack of a majority in this Parliament. You forget that in 2007, it was, you know, a cosy coalition in some ways between the SNP and the Tories that got much of the SNP's work through in that Parliament. And actually, Jeremy is spot on. You might not have much of an opposition coming when it comes to the big decisions in this Parliament, because you might have a cosy consensus from the Tories and the SNP again. Remember, it suits both the Tories and the SNP to keep going on about the Constitution rather than actually using the powers of the Parliament.
He's getting his own back now, Jackson Carlo.
Well, I confessed I didn't quite apologise.
Glenn,
what Ruth Davidson said is if she became the leader of the opposition, the first policy that we would challenge is the named person legislation. Now, we know that the Labour Party called for a pause. We know that the Liberal Democrats started to have doubts about this policy. I think it will be extraordinary if a minority SNP government seeks to force through a policy once it's lost its majority. And can I just say one other thing? If the SNP has lost the election, I think they need to have a serious examination as well of their election campaign. And I wonder whether the position of the chief... I wonder if the position of the chief executive...
The SNP hasn't lost the election.
If they've lost their majority, I wonder if the position of the chief executive is tenable.
The chief executive of the party being Peter Murrell, the husband of the SNP leader.
You know, I have to say, it's so incredibly opportunistic from the Tories to want to tackle the named persons legislation to protect Scottish youngsters.
Deeply unpopular.
An issue which is eminently sound, supported by all the professionals, and as opposed to people with huge prejudices, I think if that is the
bigger problem,
if that is the issue, if that's the policy that the Tories would want to attack, I think it speaks volumes about how out of touch they remain, notwithstanding this result.
Well, Labour, during the campaign, having supported that legislation, called for it to be reviewed. Is the SNP in a position, if it is indeed a minority government in the coming years, Stuart Hosey, prepared to concede that much, given the level of concern that has been expressed about this policy?
I think Nicola Sturgeon and indeed everyone in the SNP government have always said they will take on board any sensible suggestions. They'll listen to any sensible criticisms.
Might it need a tweak?
But when you have a policy supported almost universally by the professionals concerned about child protection, to have this degree of opportunism on this subject, I find just mind-boggling.
It was a key part of our election campaign, and it would appear that we've achieved a very considerable result in leading the opposition to this policy, and I think we're perfectly entitled to pursue that in the Parliament.
OK, well, that will be a debate, I'm sure, for the Parliament when it gets back, but clearly Jackson Carlo has put it on the agenda as a priority from his point of view in opposition. Brian Taylor, how many seats still to come? How many declarations are we awaiting at this stage?
We are awaiting the one constituency, Midlothian, etc., where we expect Christine Graham to win, and we're expecting, what is it now? It's 3, West of Scotland, South of Scotland, and North East Scotland regions. I'm not going to sit here and say that John Curtis's prediction is wrong. I think it's right. I think that's where we're going to end up. Just a couple of comments on what we've just heard there. Bow to Stuart and his support for the named persons legislation, but I've also heard Nicola Sturgeon just sounding a little bit lukewarm on the subject of that, saying, for example, in an interview with me, that it wasn't mandatory, it was voluntary, saying that perhaps it was something that could be open to review. Let's put it no higher than this. If it's a case of dumping that or getting the budget through, there's no question which would happen. I'm not saying she's dumping it. I'm not forecasting that. She defends the policy. But if there is pressure upon that, and it's going to come from the Conservatives who, for example, when Ruth Davidson lost the manifesto, opposition to that policy drew huge applause from those who were there. Now, that may be misplaced. It may be a wrong priority, whatever. But that's the way the Conservatives are currently thinking. And if they have that number of seats in the Parliament, then they've got a bit of clout. And I think it comes down to the budget. It comes down to getting the budget through.
Well, if you're keen on results, and we certainly are, the West of Scotland region is due to declare very shortly. And what you can see there are pictures from the West of Scotland count, so news clearly filtering through to those who fought hard to win places in Parliament. The Greens are among those looking happy in the West of Scotland.
Ladies and gentlemen,
and Patrick Harvie, as promised,
here are the
has turned up
results
at that
for the
count.
West Scotland region.
And here we're getting the results.
I, Sandra Black, Regional Returning Officer for the West Scotland region, declare that the total number of votes given to each of the registered parties was as follows. Rise 1,522. Scottish Christian Party 2,391. Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party 71,528. Scottish Green Party 17,218. Scottish Labour Party 72,544. Scottish Liberal Democrats 12,097. Scottish Libertarian Party 484. Scottish National Party 135,827. Solidarity 2,609. And the UK Independence Party 5,856. The total number of ballot papers rejected was 524, and the total number of votes was 322,600. This gives a turnout of 59.9%. The candidates elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament as members for the West Scotland region are as follows. Neil Bibby, Scottish Labour Party. Jamie Green, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Mary Fee, Scottish Labour Party. Maurice Golden, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Ken McIntosh, Scottish Labour Party. Maurice Corrie, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. And Ross Greer, Scottish Green Party. Thank you very much.
So in the West of Scotland, 3 seats for the Conservatives, 3 seats for Labour and 1 for the Scottish Greens. None for the Liberal Democrats or indeed for the SNP, who secured almost as many votes as Labour and the Conservatives put together, but no prizes for that result, because of, once again, their performance in the constituencies. These regional lists are designed to help balance out the Parliament and give parties a number of seats that's closer to their overall share of the vote. So let's just confirm the West of Scotland result for you. 3 Conservative MSPs in Jamie Green, Maurice Golden and Maurice Corrie, none of them previously having served at Holyrood. Labour's Neil Bibby, Mary Fee and Ken McIntosh have been elected, all MSPs in the last Parliament. Ken McIntosh, having lost Eastwood, has made it back to Holyrood on the regional list. And the 7th member of the West of Scotland list, the Greens, Ross Greer. So a breakthrough for the Greens in the West of Scotland. And we've also had the final constituency result in this Holyrood election 2016. It's for the Midlothian constituency, Midlothian South and Tweeddale, I think it is. And here is the declaration.
Michelle Ballantyne, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 10,163. Chris Chapman, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 3,686. Fiona Dugdale, Scottish Labour Party, 5,701. Christine Graham, Scottish National Party, 16,031. I declare that Christine Graham has been duly elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament as a member for the Midlothian South, Tweeddale and Lauder constituency. The number of ballot papers rejected and not counted by me at this election was as follows: 156, voting for more than one candidate 15, writing or mark...
So there it is, the final constituency result. The SNP holding Midlothian South. Christine Graham re-elected with 16,031 votes. The Conservatives, Michelle Ballantyne second with 10,163. Labour's Fiona Dugdale, no relation as far as I'm aware to the party leader, third place with 5,701 votes. And the Liberal Democrats, Chris Chapman in fourth place with 3,686. The turnout there, 59%. So the SNP with a 45% vote share. The Conservatives on 29, Labour on 16 and the Liberal Democrats on 10. Compared with 2011, the SNP up 2, the Conservatives up by a lot more, up 17, Labour down slightly and the Liberal Democrats, the big losers there, down 18 percentage points. A swing of 17% from the Liberal Democrats to the Conservatives, the SNP holding Midlothian South. Now let's take a look at the totals so far. The winning line in this election, 65. That's an overall majority. Doesn't look like the SNP are going to get there. They do have 60 seats, though, and they have won the election as a result, quite clearly. The Conservatives in second place on 25. Labour in third, 20 seats for them. The Greens on 6, ahead of the Liberal Democrats, with 4 parliamentary seats. What a remarkable emerging picture we have, Brian, in this election. We said at the start of the night it would be dramatic, but some surprises in there too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the final constituency result coming in. That's quite a big occasion, isn't it? We've got the couple of regions still to declare, which to give us the overall picture, SNP. I think to bear in mind all of the time, of course, we've got the balance of Parliament. That really matters. Nicola Sturgeon's going to be the First Minister. Nicola Sturgeon's won. The SNP have won the election. They're going to be short of an overall majority, but they contrive to govern without really all that much trouble in between 2007 and 11. And as has been pointed out, they've got a bigger share of the parliamentary seats this time around. Dreadful night for the Labour Party, quite appalling night for the Labour Party. They require to rethink and regroup. I doubt if they will change their leader. There doesn't appear to be an appetite to do so, and Kezia Dugdale appears quite determined to continue and to build upon what she admits is a difficult result. Difficult too for the Liberal Democrats falling behind the Greens.
And compare the Labour meltdown in Scotland with a position in Wales. Let's go live to Cardiff now. James Williams is there with news of the Assembly elections, and it looks like Labour will remain in power as they have done since the beginning of devolution, James.
Yeah, absolutely. The opposition parties were pitching this as a change election, but after some 10 hours of counting, Glenn, very little has changed. As far as the constituencies are concerned, 40 seats, well, 39 of them have returned exactly the same Assembly members, same party's Assembly members. One big change, though, Plaid Cymru leader Leanne Wood taking Rhondda from the Welsh Labour big beast, Leighton Andrews. A big victory for Plaid Cymru there. But as for the rest of the picture, well, it's pretty much as you were. Labour were expecting a very tough night this evening, but it seems that they will return with around 28 seats, down from their 30, but a lot better than they were expecting. It seems that the Conservatives have had the worst night. They were really gunning for a lot of those Labour Conservative marginals, hoping to pick up a number of seats, but they fell short in every single one. They dented into Labour's majorities, but they didn't actually take the seats. Plaid Cymru, as I said, they can put a gloss on it because of Leanne Wood's victory. As for the Liberal Democrats, well, they're down to 1, a really bad night for them. And as of just 5 minutes ago, we've had a breakthrough in the Assembly, UKIP members for the first time. 2 so far, we're expecting as perhaps many as 8.
James, thanks very much indeed for updating us on the picture in Wales. James Williams live from Cardiff. And we can cross to Paisley now. Ken McIntosh is there for us, newly re-elected to Holyrood, but this time as a regional list member for the west of Scotland, having lost the Eastwood seat that he's held since 1999. Congratulations and commiserations all in one, Ken McIntosh.
You've got it in a nutshell there, Glenn. I don't know what to feel. Stunned and elated?
Let's deal with the constituency first of all, because not only did you lose after all these years, you were dumped down into 3rd place. Why?
Well, I think you could see the trend developing over some time, and we had a terrible result in 2011. I remember that vividly. And then the referendum clearly really damaged Labour. We were seen as the establishment party when we were the party of change. And so it was a really catastrophic night a year ago. And today, unfortunately, we've not been able to quite recover from that. It's been a terrible night for my colleagues and for the party. But if I may say so, I can't point to the results to prove this, but it feels as though we've won some of the arguments that people are beginning to question the SNP's record. We've been able to put our argument forward on tax about the fact that, you know, a genuinely progressive party should be able to make a positive case for balancing tax against good public services.
OK, but
and
in a
the votes
constituency...
haven't followed yet, but I think they will.
In a constituency where there is a fair deal of prosperity, perhaps that tax message played against you. And to what extent was the anti-Semitism row that broke out towards the end of the campaign a factor in your defeat, given that you represent the largest Jewish population in Scotland?
Yes, well, on the first point, I'm not sure that the tax argument did work against me. I actually think that East Renfrewshire is actually a very altruistic constituency, if I can put it that way. It's, you know, an educated, liberal constituency, liberal with a small L, where people recognise that you need to pay taxes to have a decent, balanced set of public services. On the anti-Semitism point, I have to say I'm not going to look there. I think that anti-Semitism in any guise is bad for society. It's bad for the Labour Party, it's bad for any political party. And I'm not looking for excuses or to hide behind it. If the Labour Party has a problem with anti-Semitism, then we deserve to be punished for it. And I certainly wouldn't hide. I don't think the prospects of an individual Labour MSP like myself are more important than tackling something, a prejudice like anti-Semitism.
Ken McIntosh, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Maybe you can catch up on some sleep now. Ken McIntosh live from Paisley. And let's cross live once again to Holyrood, to the Scottish Parliament. This is what it's been all about, filling up the Parliament for the next 5 years, deciding who will represent different parts of Scotland in the Scottish Parliament. Shelley Joffrey is there for us for the second time this morning. Morning to you, Shelley.
Well, good morning again, and it has been a historic election because young voters, 16 and 17-year-olds, for the first time have been able to vote in parliamentary elections in Scotland to decide who's going to represent them here in Holyrood. I'm joined by a couple of first-time voters, Brooke Ritchie and Megan Dale. Was it exciting for you, Brooke?
It was exciting. It was a bit nerve-wracking, but it was exciting to definitely get allowed to vote.
And do you think that young people were feeling fully engaged in this election?
I think a lot of them were, not all of them, but that's the same with any age group, but a lot of them were, definitely my friends anyway.
Megan, what were the particular issues that you were concerned about?
My main one was education. I just wanted to see, more money put into it and more time spent on it so we can see an improvement.
So who got your vote in the end?
I gave both votes to Labour because they promised to put money into it, and that was sort of my biggest issue, so that's what drew me to them.
And among your friends, did you find much engagement in the whole debate?
Yeah, definitely. Both at home and here at university, even the ones who aren't from Scotland, because they got the chance to vote, and even they were really taking an interest in it and learning about the party policies. So yeah, definitely a big participation.
So obviously with the result though, Labour's not done very well tonight. Are you disappointed?
I mean, well, I wasn't expecting them to win a huge amount. Obviously, it's a bit disappointing when they are losing still. But I mean, maybe this is their chance to sort of look properly now and realise like what's going wrong and really taking a step back and just starting to rebuild their party again from the start.
So Brooke, what were the main issues for you when you took a while to decide who to vote for, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, similarly to Megan here, it was education and healthcare as well for me, and they were both two main issues that I really wanted to look into. So because of that, I ended up voting Liberal Democrat. And
I mean, they've had a reasonable night, but obviously not making a very big impact. How do you feel about the way things are panning out?
It's a great shame because I thought they were going to do a little bit better than they did, but never really expected them to be obviously similar to Megan with Labour. Never expected them to be a large opposition to the SNP.
OK, Brooke, Megan, thanks very much for joining us this morning, and that's it for now from Holyrood.
Thanks very much indeed, Shelley. It is Friday, May the 6th, the morning after election night before. The headlines so far this morning: the SNP have secured an historic third term in government at Holyrood, although appear to be falling short of an overall majority. The Conservatives are on course to be the largest party of opposition, displacing Labour, pushing them into third place. Labour's Kezia Dugdale has conceded the election, congratulated Nicola Sturgeon and insisted that she will remain in charge of Scottish Labour at Holyrood. And in the battle for fourth place, it looks like the Liberal Democrats will lose out to the Greens as a five-party system at Holyrood emerges from this election result. Let's cross to our election cafe for more from Fiona Stocker and her guest. Fiona.
Glenn, hi. Well, we are with the hardcore this morning, the proper journalists who have stayed up all night, fueled only by coffee and adrenaline. We have Alan Roden of the Daily Mail, Alex Massey of the Spectator, Murray MacDonald, a former Tory candidate and advisor, Jeff Aberdeen, former Chief of Staff to Alex Salmond. Alan Roden, first of all, we don't have a final result, but it's been a stunning night for the Tories. Is that good for Scotland?
It's been an extraordinary result for Ruth Davidson. Not even in her wildest dreams, I think she'd have got this number of MSPs. It changes the dynamic in Scottish politics dramatically. The leader of the opposition now will be a pro-enterprise leader who will be pro-union, staunchly pro-union, and will be in favour of low taxes. And given that it looks like the SNP is not going to get this overall majority, it gives her a platform to fight some of the SNP policies, in particular things like the named person legislation. So it dramatically changes Scottish politics overnight. And it also kills off this myth that Scotland's this left-wing country.
Murray MacDonald, you'll be a very happy man this morning. The idea of Scotland as a non-Tory zone, surely banished by the improved results?
Yeah, well, it's certainly banished. I mean, it still looks like roughly 31 Tory MSPs coming out of this, which is phenomenal. And as Alan was saying, I don't think even Ruth would have thought that. I think what is interesting in terms of the argument Ruth put across was about being a leader for strong opposition. I think she thought that was going to happen under a majority SNP government. She actually now has even more power as the opposition because we've got clearly going to have a minority government that's going to lose votes potentially or require support or change policies. So, like Alan was saying, the Named Persons Bill and the budget and so on, the Tories can have real influence over that if they choose to do so.
Jeff Aberdeen, this doesn't feel like the resounding SNP success story that some people had billed as it was.
I think we need to put this in perspective. I've just got a text from a former colleague in the SNP who says that the SNP have won a record third term, they've won the highest ever constituency vote share, and have won the highest ever number of constituency seats. So
but you don't have an overall majority?
No, indeed not. But that still strikes me as a very, very good night for the SNP. Now, I've been in government both during a minority and a majority, and there's minorities nothing to be feared of. I think actually we'd all agree that the SNP were probably at their best during 2007 and 11 when they're minority. So Nicola Sturgeon is more than capable of steering the SNP through this next 4 or 5 years.
Alex Massey, how will you remember the Scottish elections of 2016?
Well, I mean, more than one thing can be true at a time. You know, I mean, this is a very good election for the SNP, but still a slightly disappointing one, you know, in terms of losing their majorities, it now seems. But, you know, the real story in that sense, I think, for this election, and the one that I'll remember on, you know, it's Tory, Tory, Tory. You know, the force awakens and the union fights back.
Do you think we'll still see Kezia Dugdale lead the Scottish Labour Party at the next election?
Not at the next election, I don't think so, no. I think she'll stay for the time being. Next year, I think Labour's going to have a very, very tough local elections where they could lose Glasgow and North Lanarkshire Council. I think 5 years is a very long time, and I think by the time we get to 2021, there'll be someone else in charge of the party.
And just finally, constitutional question, is that going to remain a big part of Scottish political life in the next Parliament?
Well, there's still a majority, if you add the Green MSPs, the SNP, for independence, who have a mandate for independence. So I don't suggest it's going anywhere soon. It'll be a different type of argument because the SNP, the Green Party, will be able to leverage more influence on the constitutional debate, but it's certainly not going anywhere, no.
OK, well, I'm sure these debates will continue over the next few hours, over the next few days, over the next few weeks, and we'll sure you'll have your views. You can call the Call K programme on BBC Radio Scotland from 9 o'clock, and that's on BBC Radio Scotland. We're off to get some more caffeine, I can't even say it now, but if you do want to get involved, remember the hashtag is SP16.
Thanks very much, Fiona. And we were hearing earlier from Shelley that, of course, this was the first Holyrood election to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to take part, but it's also the Holyrood election that has returned the youngest ever MSP. He's a member of the Scottish Green Party. His name is Ross Greer, and he's with Sally McNair now. Sally.
Yes, standing beside me, towering above me, in fact, in many ways, Ross Greer, just celebrating the fact that on Monday morning he will become the youngest MSP to walk through the doors at Holyrood, not just in this Parliament, but in fact since the Scottish Parliament began. Well, Ross, congratulations. A very satisfying night for you personally, obviously, but also for the party.
It's a really historic night for the party, it looks like. We've still got a couple of regions to come in, but this is the first time we've ever elected anyone in the west of Scotland. It's shown just how much the Greens' reach has actually grown, communities that we're part of now that we simply haven't been before. And it's obviously nice personally to make a little bit of history as the youngest member of the Parliament, so we're ticking a few history boxes here.
And what do you think has made that difference that has made people vote for you this time?
I think, to be blunt, at the last election we didn't really exist in the west of Scotland. There were 6 of us who came here to the count from across the whole region. I was still at school at that point, so I got double physics off in the morning. And we just didn't have the reach, we didn't have the ground campaign, whereas this time we've had dozens and dozens of folk out, knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, actually engaging with the communities that they're part of themselves, and it's what's made a huge difference. The policies make a huge difference. I think people have clearly shown in this election that we can create a much better Scotland. Everyone knows the Parliament is powerful, that it's getting more powerful, but you need MSPs in there who are willing to actually push for bolder policies. And if the math shapes up the way we think it is, it looks like the Green Group, the boldest group in the Parliament, are going to have quite a bit of influence in this next session.
Well, it certainly does. It's looking at the moment as if the SNP aren't going to have the overall majority. How closely would you be prepared to work with them?
We've always been prepared to work with any government in Scotland on issues that we agree with them on, but be constructive critics where we disagree. Our preference is certainly to look at confidence and supply arrangements and similar arrangements to that, but we're going to wait until all the results are in and have a look at how it shapes up overall. But I think we can be very constructive and we can push a lot bolder policies through this next session of Parliament.
But taking it issue by issue?
That's
or
most
something
likely.
More concrete?
Issue by issue is probably most likely, but as I said, we're going to have to wait and see for the arithmetic to shape up completely. But it certainly looks like there's going to be a lot of green wins, not just tonight, but over the next 5 years there's going to be a lot of green wins going through the Parliament.
Well, for 21 years old, I know you're already very experienced, but the best of luck when you walk through Holyrood, a big learning curve for you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
it
you
will
very
be.
much.
At 21 years of age, I suppose that means Ross Greer was just 4 when the Scottish Parliament was first convened back in 1999. We're now on the 5th parliamentary term and we're almost there with election 2016. He's one of the new faces in the Holyrood Chamber over the next 5 years, but there will be many others. Let's take a look at some of the big moments of the election night with Katrina Renton.
The smile says it all. It was never really a question of if the SNP would win the most seats, but how many.
But what is now beyond doubt is that the SNP has won a 3rd consecutive Scottish Parliament election. That has never been done before in the history of the Scottish Parliament.
But it wasn't the rout that was predicted. As the ballot boxes were brought in by boat and air and the counting started in earnest, the faces told a story. As Labour, once the biggest party in the Scottish Parliament, predicted a bad night,
The manifesto we stood on is self-immolation for dummies.
while others had something of a revival. The first declaration going to the Liberal Democrats.
I declare that Liam Scott MacArthur is duly elected to serve as a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Orkney Islands constituency.
And the Lib Dems continued to do better than expected, gaining 2 seats from the SNP, Edinburgh Western, and their leader Willie Rennie won his own constituency in Fife.
I mean, 2 big wins from the SNP in this election is a tremendous result, and that's what we are very pleased about.
But it's the Conservatives who are the real comeback kids of this election, with their best result since 1992. They took Eastwood back, and Oliver Mundell is following in his father's footsteps in Dumfriesshire. And their leader took Edinburgh Central from the SNP.
To people that I've just been elected to serve in Edinburgh Central. It's the seat I was born in, it's the seat that I was educated at university in, it's the seat that I live and I work in, and it's a seat that I hope to serve for many years to come. Thank you very much.
Labour, though, have less to be happy about, losing traditional heartlands like Cowdenbeath and Fife. And they were wiped out in Glasgow, winning not a single first-past-the-post seat. Their leader, Kezia Dugdale, failed to win her own constituency, but was elected on the regional list and has vowed to carry on.
No matter what, 100%, I am remaining the leader of the Scottish Labour Party.
And I declare that Claire Haughey is elected to serve in the Scottish...
Stuart McMillan is duly elected as the member of the Scottish Parliament for the Greenock and Inverclyde constituency.
Denham Ash, Scottish National Party.
But it was SNP victory after victory, although they've not yet reached that magic number of 65 seats, which would give them an outright majority. And it could be the other parties who become the kingmakers, like the Greens, with their best result ever so far on 6 seats.
We've gained momentum, we've gained a lot of profile, I think, during this campaign, and we've certainly gained the expertise and the experience of getting our campaigners and volunteers out there on a scale that we've never seen before.
So perhaps this is not the election that was expected, as we wait to see if the SNP does get that overall majority.
Katrina Renton with the story of the night here in Scotland. Let's cross live to Westminster now. Our political correspondent Carol Walker is there for the picture from the English local government elections and the impact on UK politics. Carol.
Yes, well, thank you, Glenn. The picture in England, we've still only got about half the council seats in so far. Labour has lost ground, lost about 24 seats so far. 1 council, Dudley, but have not done as badly as many people had predicted. They held on to places like Crawley and Southampton. There had been some pretty dire predictions that the party could lose up to 200 seats. It doesn't look as though the losses will be anything like that serious. But it has to be said that there are already still some new questions about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Labour MPs are pointing out that the party is nowhere near where it needs to be if it's going to have a chance of regaining power at the next general election, and that Jeremy Corbyn is actually doing worse than when these seats were last fought 4 years ago under Ed Miliband. So I think that the leadership of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, will be saying this is no time for questions about a leadership challenge we need to be rallying around, and there doesn't seem to be any immediate prospect of it. But I think the questions remain certainly about how he's going to reach out beyond Labour's core vote. The Conservatives, just a handful of gains. They'll be pretty relieved to be where they are, given the party's own internal divisions over the EU referendum, and that in many ways is the bigger battle for the Conservative Party. UKIP have gained some ground, particularly in Wales. Looks as though Labour are going to retain control in Wales. Plaid Cymru making a little bit of ground there. Still a mixed picture and a lot of results still to come, including very significantly the result of the London mayor here in London, but we won't be getting that until later on this afternoon.
Thanks very much indeed. Carol Walker live at Westminster. Live to Jackie Bird now.
Well, it is a third term in office for the SNP after a resounding win in the Holyrood election. However, it appears the party might fall short of an overall majority. Here's how the parties are sitting, with 14 regional seats still to be declared. SNP at the top there with 60. Conservatives, a great night for them, on 25. Labour 20. The Greens on 6. And the Lib Dems trailing behind on 4. It has been a disastrous night for Labour in Scotland again. They've gained some ground on the list votes, but in the constituency battles, they lost 13 seats, mainly to the SNP and 2 to the Conservatives. It has been a great night for the Conservatives across the country. As I said, their leader, Ruth Davidson, won her seat in Edinburgh Central and will likely find herself as the head of the official opposition in the next Parliament. There were other constituency wins too, with Jackson Carlaw taking Eastwood, and one of the big surprises of the night. And there'll be some new faces on the blue benches come Monday. The Tories will be sending at least 18 MSPs from the regional lists to Holyrood. Here's what Ruth Davidson had to say.
I think one thing that we're learning as tonight goes on is that there are people right across Scotland who are sending the SNP a message. Their voices and the decision that we made as a country won't be ignored. Nowhere is that more evident than in Edinburgh Central, where we were coming from 4th position. It's been a tremendous fight in Edinburgh Central. There's some people that I would like to thank. First and foremost, my agent, James.
It certainly was a tremendous fight. Finally, this headline in the Aberdeen Evening Express attempts to include the big stories of the night. Nick's back, Labour whacked, Tories thrown a bone. They did try. Glenn?
I don't know what to say about that. Nick's back, Labour whack, Tories thrown a bone. It's not bad for the middle of the night. Brian Taylor, there are a few things that we have yet to pick up on in this story. We haven't said much about UKIP, mainly because UKIP haven't done anything in this election so far. Highlands and Islands, no seat there for David Coburn, no seat anywhere else either.
It hasn't happened for them. You look at the share. They haven't taken any seats. They don't look like taking any seats. They were forecasting at one point that they would take a seat in every region, and particularly David Coburn was optimistic in the Highlands. Well, that hasn't happened. Just glancing at some of the shares, you know, it's down about the 2 points rather than the 7 or 8 that they needed. 1.8 in West of Scotland, 2.2 in Central Scotland. It's that sort of level, and that's nowhere near taking a seat. And UKIP remain, other than a force in Scottish politics, despite Mr Coburn's presence as a representative in the European Parliament.
Obviously, the SNP have won this election, but some of their rivals point out that they've lost their majority. What's the most significant of those two features?
Well, it is a remarkable election victory for the SNP. Top constituency results ever. More constituency seats than ever before, but it's going to feel to many like a real disappointment, because there was that expectation of a second absolute majority. And that raises the issue about the second vote, the regional list vote. A couple of weeks ago, when there was speculation that the SNP might get almost all of the constituency seats, people were saying, well, if that's the case, then the regional list vote for the SNP is wasted. You can give it to the Greens or someone else, Greens in particular, so that you can get a pro-independence majority. That really appears to have damaged the SNP. 42% we're projecting on the regional list. That's why they haven't got a majority.
Expectation management problem during this election campaign for you and the SNP, Stuart Hosey?
I don't think we were setting hares running. Other people were saying we're going to win every seat. They were talking about 73. That was always going to be ridiculously difficult, to the point of impossible. I think what this does tell us, so all of us and the public, this is a PR parliament.
Proportional representation.
Absolutely right. You can run a minority administration, as we did very successfully in 2007. You can run a formal alliance, as Labour and the Liberals did in previous parliaments. You can run a majority government, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to get. And I think this is a nice salutary reminder to all of us. This is a proportional parliament. And I think we're all going to have to come to terms that not every government in Scotland is going to be a majority one.
So you're suggesting that somehow normal service is being resumed?
Well, there's only been one majority government out of the 5 so far. There may be one next time, there may not be one next time. But I think it's a salutary lesson to all of us that all the governments, from time to time, are going to have to do deals, do negotiations, listen more carefully, maybe not try and pass so much legislation, do things in another way to make sure programmes for government actually get delivered.
Will that make this a better Parliament, Martin McCluskey for Labour?
I think it's the result we've had tonight is obviously disappointing. We've lost some very good colleagues who'll be a loss to the Parliament. But what this will bring back, I think, is more of the consensual politics that we used to have in the Scottish Parliament pre 2011 in the SNP's majority. I think it also means that the Scottish Government, the new Scottish Government, are going to be faced with a choice, and that choice is, do they use Tory votes to push through austerity budgets, or do they go with parties like Labour, the Liberals or the Greens now, all parties which had in their manifestos decisions, choices to increase tax, to stop austerity. And I think that's going to be a choice that's going to be on the Scottish Government's radar very, very quickly. And I think in this election we've obviously seen the Scottish public deliver a result that I think is probably broadly where the country is right now, which is, a strong SNP vote reflecting the outcome of the referendum, but a lot more diversity on the other side, and even at the sort of left fringes of the SNP, Greens peeling, people peeling off to the Greens in the list vote and that kind of thing. So I think it's probably bringing more diversity, not the result that we wanted, obviously.
A more consensual Parliament over the next 5 years? The late David McCletchie would have hated that.
He certainly would. I mean, it is interesting to me. I mean, last year David Cameron went from minority to majority. 12 months later, the SNP have gone from majority to minority. And I think we're kind of underselling the significance of that story, because the presumption underpinning everything that was happening today and in this campaign was that the SNP were going to form another majority government. And we're talking now also about the committee structure in the Scottish Parliament, which, of course, the SNP have dominated for the last Parliament. And there was a feeling that the SNP minority government was a better legislative government than the majority government proved to be between 2011 and today. And I think it will be very interesting to see, given that there clearly will now be a more robust opposition across the whole of the Parliament, even if the Conservatives are now leading it, as to just what that does to the whole mood and tempo of the Parliament. Because there was a definite arrogance, I think, in the way that it was drifting, and I think that's been called to halt tonight.
Well, we've touched on the election of a new presiding officer. Presumably the SNP, with the numbers they're looking at, won't want one of their number to be elected to that post. Looking at it from your perspective, Jeremy Purvis, would it be healthier for somebody to take that job from an opposition party position, and for the committees no longer to have an inbuilt SNP majority?
There's been opposition and there's been government party presiding officers. I think that's thankfully going to be one of the genuine choices for all MSPs on the basis of who would be the best to do that, regardless of party position. I also, as a former member of the Finance Committee, desperately want to see the Holyrood Parliament, perhaps following the House of Commons, to have directly elected chairs of committees. I think that works well, and I know that Tricia Marwick was keen on that.
The last presiding officer.
The outgoing presiding officer. Sure. That would change the dynamic when there's a minority for the government party. So I think the Parliament will be a very different one. And the status of the SNP manifesto now is very different from if it was an overall majority. How Nicola Sturgeon what language she will use to define what mandate she will have will be very different, because I cannot for the life of me think that the SNP manifesto now has a mandate to be delivered in its entirety. So I think that is a very interesting dynamic. And of course the Liberal Democrats will play a constructive role, as Willie Rennie did in the last Parliament.
Although as the fifth place party, having been overtaken by the Greens.
Well, if we are a group in the Parliament, if we have 5 MSPs, I mean, of course I would love to have gone further. But actually that is broadly irrelevant. I mean, 5 or 6, where we will be a constituted group, and I think Willie will continue to punch well beyond the number of MSPs that are there. So 6 or 5 broadly in a minority situation is not relevant in that situation.
I think there needs to be a sense of reality here. We're the biggest party, we've won the election, but it's not a majority. I think technically you're right, there isn't a mandate to deliver everything in that manifesto. But let's be in no doubt, with 47% of the first past the post votes...
Jose, this is the South of Scotland list. Let's hear that.
I give notice
that in the election of regional members to represent the South Scotland, the votes cast were Clydesdale and South Scotland Independent, 1,485. Rise, Respect, Independence, Socialism and Environmentalism, 1,097. The Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 100,753. The Scottish Green Party, 14,773. The Scottish Labour Party, 56,072. The Scottish Liberal Democrats, 11,775. The Scottish National Party, 120,217. Solidarity, Scotland's Socialist Movement, 1,294. The UK Independence Party, 6,726. The regional member seats for the South Scotland have been allocated, and I therefore declare the following candidates elected as members of the Scottish Parliament for the South Scotland region. Claudia Beamish for the Scottish Labour Party, Joan McAlpine for the Scottish National Party, Rachel Hamilton for the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, Emma Harper for the Scottish National Party, Colin Smith for the Scottish Labour Party, Paul Wheelhouse for the Scottish National Party, and Brian Whittle for the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
So that's your South of Scotland list. The declaration is complete. From there, Jim Hume of the Liberal Democrats losing out. No Liberal Democrat returned in the South of Scotland on the list. 3 seats for the SNP, 2 for the Conservatives and 2 for Labour. Let's just confirm those elected. The SNP's Joan McAlpine returns to Holyrood, having failed in her constituency battle. She's back as a list member. The SNP's Emma Harper, a new member, and the SNP Minister Paul Wheelhouse, who lost out to the Conservatives in Ettrick, has made it back to Holyrood, although I'm sure he's had a nail-biting period between the constituency declaration and this one. For the Conservatives, 2 new MSPs, Rachel Hamilton and Brian Whittle, and Labour's 2 on the South of Scotland list are Claudia Beamish returning and a new member in Colin Smith. So, 7 of the 8 regions declared, and here's how the regional seats break down. The Conservatives have been the biggest winners on the list so far, with 20 regional seats, up 10 on last time. Labour has 19. That's no change on last time. The Scottish Greens are on 6. That's up 4. And the SNP have 4, which is down 11 on last time. The Liberal Democrats haven't picked up any regional seats and at this stage are down 2, and the others down 1, which I suspect reflects the fact that Margot MacDonald passed away in the last Parliament and therefore was not a candidate this time around. The total number of seats at Holyrood at this stage, with 1 regional list to declare in the northeast of Scotland, the SNP have 63 seats, 2 short of an overall majority, down 5 on 2011. The Conservatives are on 27, up 14. Labour on 22 in 3rd place, down 12. The Scottish Greens have 6, up 4. And the Liberal Democrats have 4 seats at Holyrood. Brian Taylor, is there any way the SNP could get over the line in this last North East list?
It seems pretty unlikely, because even in the previous election, when they won every constituency seat, they took 1 list MSP from the North East. They're not doing just perhaps as well enough to get 2. They would need 2. It seems to me that they will fall just that bit short, but nevertheless, they will form the government. Nicola Sturgeon will be the First Minister. They have won the election.
They've won the election, but as we've been discussing, Charlie Jeffrey, it's going to be a different kind of parliament over the next few years.
It certainly will be if the SNP does indeed fall that one seat short. We will be looking at a parliament where deals are made and where the parliament itself becomes a more important venue for business. The committees should be a little bit more like the original vision, and perhaps as we saw between 2007-11, as an arena for genuine discussion, not simply discussion driven by party whips.
Well, let's cross live to Aberdeen to our reporter Stephen Duff, where we're awaiting the result of the North East regional list. Any chance, do you think, Stephen, that the SNP could pick up a couple?
I think the feeling here is no, probably one, but that comes down to the last result from the North East region that's just been declared, the Aberdeen Donside result that there was a recount in. But we'll have to see what happened in Dundee, Angus, Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen. The maths will be being done just now. But I think the sense all night has been the SNP would be very happy to get one seat, 2 seats. Too difficult, probably, but they did surprise us at the last Scottish elections by getting 1 seat after winning all the constituencies in the North East. But the mood, the sense, I think the 1 seat is what they'll get from the North East list.
And any update, Stephen, on the timing of that, well, what is now the final declaration?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the recount, I'll just recap briefly what happened there. Earlier, there had been concerns raised that a relative of the Labour list candidate, Lewis MacDonald, had been counting votes in the list votes for Aberdeen Donside. So that's why there was a partial recount. There's no suggestion there was anything irregular, but the returning officer wanted to make sure things were done right. As for a timing, as I say, they'll be doing the maths just now to decide on the proportionality of what the Aberdeen Donside result means to the whole mix. It could be within the next 10 minutes maybe, but I'm sticking my neck out a bit there.
Well, we'll not hold you to that, unless, of course, it doesn't happen. Thank you very much for the moment, Stephen Duff, reporting for us live in Aberdeen. And despite the fact that the Liberal Democrats are below the Greens in this election, they do have constituency wins to celebrate, and we hear that Tim Farron, the federal leader of the Liberal Democrats, will help Willie Rennie celebrate, not in the Fife North East constituency, where Willie Rennie won, but in Edinburgh Western, where his colleague Alex Cole-Hamilton made the breakthrough and won that seat back from the SNP. Let's get more now from David Henderson.
Glenn, a Scottish Parliament has been described by many as the settled will of the Scottish people, but it's already changed a lot in its short history. MSPs have come and gone, and the powers, too, are anything but settled. So let's take you back to 1999, Queen Elizabeth opening the Parliament, which at that time was in its temporary home at the Church of Scotland's General Assembly Hall. Donald Dewar was Scotland's First Minister, but he was governing in coalition, remember, with the Liberal Democrats. There's their leader, Jim Wallace. Now, fast forward 4 years. After the 2003 election, Labour were leading another coalition government. Jack McConnell there, the First Minister. But this was the Rainbow Parliament with smaller parties very well represented. There's Rosie Kane, one of 6 socialist MSPs in the Parliament. The Greens were represented, so too the Senior Citizens Unity Party, and Margot MacDonald there, elected as an independent. Well, let's jump to 2007, voting confusion on the night, you may recall, with more than 100,000 ballots rejected. In the end, the SNP emerged in charge, Alex Salmond becoming Scotland's 4th First Minister. No coalition deal this time. Instead, the SNP chose to govern as a minority. Those smaller parties were squeezed out of Parliament, which by now was in its permanent home at Holyrood. So let's move on to 2011, a thumping victory for the SNP, despite a voting system designed to make it very difficult for any party to win overall control. Alex Salmond was back in charge and able to call a referendum on whether Scotland should become an independent country. The vote was no. Alex Salmond resigned and Nicola Sturgeon took over. Which brings us to 2016 and this election, to a much stronger Scottish Parliament, gaining further powers over income tax and welfare. As things stand this morning, Nicola Sturgeon is set to be First Minister again, but probably not at the helm of a majority government as she was before. Instead, it looks like we'll see a return to the minority governments last seen at Holyrood between 2007 and 2011. So what will Nicola Sturgeon do with the Parliament's new powers? Is another independence referendum off or on the agenda? Is the will of the Scottish people truly settled? Lots of questions, Glenn, to which we don't yet have all the answers.
Not just yet. 63 seats is the tally for the SNP at the moment. If they pick up one more in the North East, and we think we'll get that declaration pretty soon, then that would take them to 64. Doesn't quite take them over the winning line, the overall majority that 65 would represent. But of course, somebody has to become the presiding officer. So in those circumstances, you would have potentially, well, a tie-breaking situation, but who would want the job of being the presiding officer? Perhaps something we'll pick up on in a little moment. We've got our political panel here with us. We've got the Professor of Politics, Charlie Jeffrey from Edinburgh University, and our very own Brian Taylor with further analysis.
Glenn, it could be an entertaining point you mentioned there about the presiding officer. I reckon it'll be, you know, after you, Claude, after you, Cecil. And Labour actually in their manifesto said that it shouldn't be the lead party. I think the SNP will now be saying, great idea, we'll adopt that policy tomorrow, and it should be a Labour MSP or whoever that's the presiding officer. Take a glance here at the dashboard. There's, remember, the hex that shows the changes. I guess that probably counts as North East Fife there, and it's the Liberal Democrats. Let's look at the map of Scotland, perhaps, as well. SNP seats everywhere. There's Willie Rennie there. There's the Conservative victories, quite a few of them scattered around. A couple of Liberal Democrats, of course, as well in the Northern Isles. But it's the list that has added to the difference in this election tonight. And there's the chamber as it currently is, with, what is it, still 4 seats to be... No, 7, of course. It's all the list seats in the North East still to be declared. Now, let's take a look back. Oh, there's the chamber. That's helpful as well. 122 seats declared. Little gaps. Conservatives, SNP, pretty well substantially there. But as we've been saying, unlikely to get that overall majority. Let's take a quick look at where we are on constituency share, etc. So the first one that comes up in that is the share of the vote in the constituencies, in what we call the first vote. 47% for the SNP. I know we're saying they're falling short, and they are, of an overall majority, but that is still staggering. 47%. Labour at 23, just on the constituency, ousting the Conservatives. Liberal Democrats 8, better than some had feared, and the others don't really feature because they don't stand in all that many seats. The change, it's the change that tells you the story. SNP up 1, Labour down a staggering 9, Conservatives up an impressive 8, Lib Dems down minus 0.1. Pretty well standstill. Here's the share of the vote for the regions. Again, the SNP are in the lead at 42%. Precious good it did them in terms of getting seats on the list vote because they got so many of the constituencies. Conservatives, though, are on 22%, and they have ousted the Labour Party on the share of the vote for the regions. That little gap there, that is telling a lot of the story of the night. Here's another story of the night. The Greens on the regional share of the vote on 7%, more than the Liberal Democrats. That's why the Greens are picking up seats, the Lib Dems, 4 constituencies. And here's the change in the share of the vote on that regional vote. Down 2 for the SNP, whopping increase for the Conservatives, up 10. Labour down, Greens up 2, but it's enough to really help them into a good position. Liberal Democrats pretty well stand still on 0.1%. That's how it's shaping up, Glenn.
Thank you very much indeed. And just those 7 seats still to be declared in the North East the North East regional list. That's what we're waiting for. That's what they're waiting for. We're waiting for. Everybody's waiting for. But I don't think we've got too much longer to wait. We're here right through until just after 9 o'clock this morning. I confidently predict we'll get this result between now and then, hopefully sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, let's just talk a little bit more about the outcome of this election with our political panel. We've still got Stuart Hosey from the SNP, Martin McCluskey for Labour, Jackson Carlaw for the Conservatives and Jeremy Purvis, Lord Purvis, for the Liberal Democrats. 63, if it becomes 64, how will Nicola Sturgeon play that?
I think when Brian was going through the numbers there, it indicates what Nicola Sturgeon will do. First preference votes, first past the post votes, the SNP have more than Labour and Tory combined. List votes, we've got more than Labour and Tory combined. We've not got an overall majority, that's going to be clear. I think that's absolutely clear. There's a pretty decent mandate for that manifesto, though. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if Nicola tried to press on and get as much of that detailed manifesto delivered as possible, given the strength of the support and the fact that it is more than Labour and the Tory combined, either in a list or first preference votes.
Does that mean doing a deal on each policy with other parties or what?
If we're back into a no overall majority position, of course there's got to be discussions, there's got to be negotiations, there's got to be a bit of give and take. And that's a good thing. I said earlier, perhaps we're back to a more proportional system. Perhaps the majority government was the aberration for that one term. But I think the key thing will be to say, yeah, let's talk where we can, let's see what we agree on, but let's try and deliver as much of that manifesto because it's very close to having a very good mandate.
And would you rather, in these circumstances, that whoever the presiding officer is, that he or she comes from a party other than the SNP?
I think it would have to depend on where the deals might be struck as to whether or not you would want to have the presiding officer or not. But given there are clear rules...
Although it is an independent
I was going to say, given there are clear rules around what the presiding officer does, can and cannot do, I think it's less of an issue than some people would make it out to be.
Jackson Carlaw, the second-place party now at Holyrood, the Conservatives, promising a strong opposition. That was the slogan that Ruth Davidson campaigned on. What does that actually mean?
It means exactly what it says, that Ruth Davidson is going to lead a principled, centre-right opposition to the SNP. Not
against
just
everything that they propose?
No, not just saying we... No, I mean, for example, on the health service, where I think we have proved to be quite a constructive opposition in the last Parliament. We didn't stand on the sidelines and simply shout, "Yaboo sucks to you." We tried to... In fact, we said that we would work with the Scottish Government on some of the very difficult decisions that need to be taken in order to secure the public service health model that I think we all want to see in the next Parliament. And in fact, both our parties were promising a very significant increase in health service funding. So on certain issues, no. I mean, it'll be a principled opposition. But on other key issues, it will no longer be a mini-me opposition where we simply sit in the sidelines as Labour did and say, well, we would have done that exactly, we would have done the same thing, but we would have done it better. So you'll have a different character to the opposition. But I think it's interesting. We're already seeing the cloak of a new democratic spirit descending from Stuart Hosey's shoulders as he starts to talk no longer about we will say who the presiding officer is. And all of a sudden it's to be the democratic decision of the Parliament. This is the first sign, I think, of the practical reality of last night's result dawning.
Well, another reality which no doubt has already dawned on Labour is this third-place position, a diminished position in the Scottish Parliament. Does that mean, Martin McCluskey, that we can expect Labour to spend the next period looking inwards and obsessing about what went wrong and what it needs to do to recover, or will it be a force in the opposition ranks at Holyrood too?
Absolutely not. There's not going to be a long period of introspection and, introversion like we've seen after previous elections. We had a devastating result last year. This is a very disappointing result tonight. Last year we lost all but one of our MPs. Tonight, obviously, is not where we wanted to be, but it was going to be a challenge, and we always, we were very clear about that. Kes was very clear about that when she was elected 9 months ago, that, it was going to be difficult and it would take time to come back. She's been given a mandate by the party for, what she sees as a 5-year project right up to the next Scottish Parliament elections to regain that ground. And, I think Stuart spoke a moment ago about the mandate for the manifesto. This is one of the most timid SNP manifestos that we've ever seen. So, if anything, I've made this point earlier, I would make it again.
Published ours for the public to look at.
We published ours for the public to look at as well. But look, let's put that argument behind us. That was an argument. That was an argument for the. That was the argument for the election.
Let's not revisit that.
It was a timid manifesto. And the SNP...
It's a winning manifesto, isn't it?
It's a timid manifesto. The SNP are going to have a choice in government as to whether or not they look to the left, or, as Jackson just said, it's a centre-right opposition that the Conservatives are offering, not a centre-left opposition. So do the SNP choose to go down the austerity road, or do they choose to be more radical with parties of the left that are now in Holyrood?
Well, it has often been said or suggested that Scotland is a left-leaning country, but given the success of the Conservatives tonight, is that true now, if it ever was true, Jeremy Purvis?
I think it's more complex than that now. I think that identity and nationalism is here, and it is here to stay for quite a long time. And that is why I'm pretty convinced that there is very little space for Labour in the future of Scottish politics. I do think that this is now fundamental to the future of the Labour Party. I think that there is a form of realignment over the next Parliament. And the fact that this is going to be likely to be a minority will change the dynamic in addition to that. So it's going to be a very different next 5 years in Scottish Parliament than we thought that when we started this broadcast at 10 o'clock last night.
And the election, of course, following a lengthy 6-week-long campaign. Some people said that it was dull, that it was tepid, I think was the word Brian Taylor used to describe it, but it wasn't without its lighter moments, as Andrew Kerr has been finding out.
It was a more sedate campaign trail for the SNP leader. Politicians are drawn to babies during elections.
This thing coming up here, Mike says, can't hear us, Coffin. Coffin?
Well, they poured out their hearts for the people of Scotland. But were they impressed?
Have you been paying a lot of attention to the election campaign?
No.
Are you interested in it, or is it none of the big issues capturing your imagination?
No.
Things like income tax?
No.
So, our politicians look to the animal kingdom for inspiration.
Oh, he's eating my ear.
And the bit you've all been waiting for.
We like to organise our visits to send a message in pictorial terms, exactly what we're asking for. And I think this does it very well today.
Well, I've no idea whether Willie Rennie's worked out what the message was that he was trying to communicate. You any idea, Jeremy Purvis?
All I can confirm is Edinburgh Zoo are not hiring Willie Rennie for the pandas situation at the moment. But I think the message is rather than clear. We're growing and we're multiplying.
He wasn't wasn't responsible for the pigs in the background. But what on earth was he doing? What on earth was he doing? Climbing into a sty and trying to muck it out while all the pigs were knocking over his wheelbarrow. What possible message was that sending?
Well,
other than clear up the Stygian mess, as
it gave you and others plenty of material to play with. So I suppose we have to be grateful for that. Let's cross out live to Shelley Joffrey. She's at the Scottish Parliament. I don't know if you have a particular highlight from the campaign and from the many photo calls, some quirkier than others, Shelley.
Oh, it's got to be the pigs, really, hasn't it? Welcome back to a wonderfully sunny Holyrood. Maybe that's a sign of things to come. This, of course, is where all the new MSPs will be arriving on Monday morning to get registered, to get settled into their new job for the next 5 years. Then on Wednesday, on the eve of the first sitting of the new parliamentary session, there will be a multi-faith service at St Giles Cathedral. But business proper really starts the next day, on Thursday. The outgoing presiding officer, Trish Marwick, will preside over the swearing-in, MSPs' oaths and affirmations. They basically can't take part in parliamentary procedures until they've done all that. Then there'll be a new presiding officer elected. It won't be until the following week, probably the 18th or 19th of May, that it's likely that the First Minister will be elected. We're obviously going to see a lot of changes in the chamber, but I think there's little doubt that the First Minister is going to be Nicola Sturgeon, almost certainly leading a minority SNP government. That's what Her Majesty the Queen is likely to find when she comes to Edinburgh at the start of July to open the Parliament for the 5th session of the Scottish Parliament. She'll address MSPs in the chamber. So there's lots happening, lots to look forward to, but from Holyrood for now, that's it.
Thanks very much indeed for that look ahead, Shelley. I've always thought it a bit odd, Brian Taylor, that the Queen comes to open the new session of Parliament and then they promptly wrap up for the summer holidays.
It seems like an excellent idea to me. In your end is your beginning, and in your beginning is your end. The Queen has I mean, of course, the situation. The reason there's a vote in Parliament is that the rules were that the Parliament has to nominate to Her Majesty the Queen the nominee for First Minister. Her Majesty the Queen generally doesn't. The Mar certainly hasn't done so thus far. Bring in one tiny little thing there, as you see some contented Conservatives gazing on and waiting for the North East result. I should say I was describing Labour's result as the worst since 1910 in terms of being third placed. I've now done some very thorough research. It is only the worst since 1918. The thorough research is that Charlie told me it was 1918, and I agreed, having looked up the figures. In 1918, Labour came third behind the Conservatives, two forms of Liberal, coalition and non-coalition, and they gained only 6 seats in that quite remarkable election, post-war election. So not quite as bad as was feared, but not exactly stunning either.
Well, in that election, I don't think they fought every constituency in the country, which is another factor.
One of the curious factors. In 22, the famous 22 election, when the Conservatives declared themselves to be distinct and autonomous, the Labour Party gained 29 seats in Scotland. They've done awfully well since, for the most part. Although, if you go even further back into the 19th century, they had absolutely nothing, and the Liberal Party were the totally dominant party, winning virtually all the votes and nearly all the seats.
OK, I think we are getting closer to that declaration from Aberdeen, the final declaration of election 2016. Is this the man that's going to make it, or is he giving us an update? I don't think it's the declaration just yet, but those 7 seats in the northeast of Scotland will complete the 129 members of the Scottish Parliament, and we hope to bring you that very soon indeed. Those are live pictures from Aberdeen, and that is where the results of the North East list will be declared. So I think we're moving towards that position. We'll stay on those pictures for the moment and bring in our contributors from the political panel that we have here. Now, the Conservatives have been picking up seats on the lists, Jackson Carlaw. You had 2 in the North East last time around. Would you expect something similar, or to do better than that this time? having made the constituency breakthrough.
Yeah, I think if the BBC prediction is right, we are going to do better than that, and that's over and above the fact that we have taken a seat first past the post in the region as well. But I think what the entire unfolding result demonstrates is that the strategy of the Scottish Conservatives to ask people to consider how they use their second vote, to cast it for Ruth Davidson, a strong opposition, is one that appealed to people across Scotland and in all parts of Scotland. This isn't one region in isolation. It has happened in every region across Scotland, and I think it's really quite remarkable. And, you know, the challenge for us now is to deliver on the kind of enormous, the enormous result that we've achieved.
Jeremy Purvis, the Lib Dems had one seat in the North East last time around. You've been squeezed in other regions, but might you hang on to that one seat in the North East?
I hope so. And if I may, for our loss of Jim Hume in the south of Scotland is a great loss. He's a friend of mine. He's been a really, really active MSP, and he will be missed. But we're hoping that we can somehow correct that with having a North East seat on the list.
And interestingly, that would be that would see the return of Mike Rumbles to the Scottish Parliament, a prominent figure in past Parliament, having lost his seat at the last Holyrood election. He's decided to try and make a comeback on the list. He's the lead candidate in the North East, so we may see more of him at Holyrood in the coming years. From a Labour perspective, Martin McCluskey, 3 seats last time. Even if you win those 3 again, it's not going to take you close enough to the Conservatives. You're still going to be in 3rd place, whatever happens here.
And we would be hoping to see at least 2 of those seats return this evening. And Lewis MacDonald and Jenny Mara return to the North East with 2 seats. And, you know, it's the result that we're seeing, you know, across, as I've said already, is disappointing, but it does still provide us with, you know, a spread across Scotland of MSPs who can provide opposition to the SNP over the next 5 years.
And interestingly, if it is 2 seats, the 3rd place Labour candidate, Leslie Brennan, who's only been an MSP for a handful of weeks, having come in when another Labour MSP stood down just towards the end of the Parliament. She loses her seat, but as I understand it, will be able to claim half a year's parliamentary salary in a payoff. Does that seem fair?
I'm not aware of exactly how the rules work in Holyrood. I don't know what the rules are, but you know, I'm sure that's a decision for Leslie if she isn't returned to the Scottish Parliament this morning.
Whether or not.
Yeah, I think that's a decision for her. But as I say, I don't know what the rules are around pay and, you know, conditions and what would happen.
Yes, you were a candidate for Holyrood this time, but you haven't served in the Scottish Parliament. The SNP, Stuart Hosey, dominated the North East at the last election, but still picked up 1 parliamentary constituency. What's your best guess for this list result when it comes?
Well, even though we lost West Aberdeenshire, it'll be very hard to take a seat, to take a place on that list. I think the Tory vote will be sufficient to take a number. I think we're absolutely right. Labour will pick up at least 2. The way the Greens have been picking up and the Liberals haven't been, I wouldn't be surprised if the Greens pick up and the Libs don't. And of course, at that point, the Lib Dems wouldn't be a formal group in the Parliament, of course, which would rather weaken their position going forward. Well, I guess we'll all just have to live with that. So if we pick up 1, great. If we were to pick up 2, I'd be delighted. I suspect we're not going to, and the 63 or maybe 64 is where we're going to be.
Well, this is an important list for the Scottish Greens because their co-convener, Maggie Chapman, who leads the party along with Patrick Harvey, is the lead candidate there, and it would be quite a big blow to her if she wasn't elected this time around, Brian Taylor.
Well, anything, regardless of the parliamentary arithmetic, there are going to be some parliamentary challenges for those parliamentarians. They're going to be determining Scotland's income tax, and that debate that we've heard here is going to happen. They're going to have control of some of the welfare proposals. One we haven't mentioned, council tax. There are big changes proposed by several of the parties on council tax. Will it be the SNP version? Will there be some input from the Conservative proposals? The Conservative and SNP proposals on council tax are pretty close to each other. The Labour Party taking a different position, and the Greens considerably different. So that will be a really intriguing one. And these things, body of these things, matter to people. It's income tax, it's council tax, as well as the expenditure. It's the amount that comes from the pocket. And that Parliament, however formed, however calculated, whatever the final shape, will have to take these decisions, and that's a big choice.
Yeah, that's the other big change in this new Parliament, that it will be, Charlie Jeffrey, the most powerful Scottish Parliament that there's been to date.
It certainly will, and looking internationally, it becomes one of the more powerful ones around the world. And that does require not just the boldness to take difficult decisions, it requires an awful lot of technical expertise. This is about taxation, it's about welfare powers. This takes the Parliament into a new area of complexity.
Some people have suggested that this is Holyrood growing up after 17 years, becoming responsible not just for spending decisions, but having to think about how money is raised as well. And among this lineup in Aberdeen, some of those who will be taking part in the decision-making in that next Parliament. Let's see exactly who
the results
has been
of the
elected in the
verification
North
stage
East.
for the North East Scotland region were as follows. Electorate 579,544. Total votes cast 307,524. Turnout 53.06%. I, Angela Scott, Regional Returning Officer for the Scottish Parliamentary election in the North East Scotland region, hereby give notice that the total number of votes polled for each registered party at the election was as follows. Communist Party of Britain, 510. Rise, Respect, Independence, Socialism and Environmentalism, 599. Scottish Christian Party proclaiming Christ's Lordship, 2,068. Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 85,848. The Scottish Green Party, 15,123. Scottish Labour Party, 38,791. The Scottish Liberal Democrats, 18,444. The Scottish Libertarian Party, 552. Scottish National Front, 617. Scottish National Party, 137,086. Solidarity. Scotland Socialist Movement, 992. UK Independence Party, UKIP, 6,376. The total number of rejected votes was 518. The reason for rejection was as follows. Lack of official mark or unique identifying mark, 0. Voting for more than one party under candidate, 103. Writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, 4. Unmarked or void for uncertainty, 411. The following candidates are duly elected to serve as members of the Scottish Parliament for the North East Scotland region are Alex Johnson, Scottish Conservative and Unionist. Jenny Mara, Scottish Labour Party. Ross Thompson, Scottish Conservative and Unionist. Peter Chapman, Scottish Conservative and Unionist. Lewis MacDonald, Scottish Labour Party. Mike Rumbles, Scottish Liberal Democrats. And Liam Kerr, Scottish Conservative and Unionist.
Well, the Conservatives are back big time in the North East of Scotland with 4 seats in the North East list. They're the big winners there. Let's just confirm the results for you and those elected. The Conservatives, Alex Johnson returns to Holyrood, along with Ross Thompson, Peter Chapman and Liam Kerr, who are all new members of Parliament. For Labour, Jenny Mara and Lewis MacDonald make it back for another term in the Scottish Parliament. And the comeback kid, Liberal Democrat Mike Rumbles. He wasn't there over the last 5 years, but he has resumed his Holyrood career at this election, making it in on the North East list. No seat for the Greens there. Their co-leader Maggie Chapman hasn't made it, and no seat either for the SNP, albeit that they had one last time around. So that leaves them on a final total of 63 seats. The largest party, the winners of this election, but short of that overall majority which would come with 55. So the total seats, let's just confirm those for you. The SNP, as I say, on 63. That's down 6 on last time. The Conservatives in second place with 31, up 16. Labour pushed into third place with 24 seats, down 13. The Greens taking fourth place, pushing the Liberal Democrats into fifth. They've got 6 seats, up 4. The Liberal Democrats finished with 5. That's enough to form a parliamentary group. Brian Taylor.
Yeah, and it's Mike Rumbles that gives them their parliamentary strength to form a group. And of course, in a previous existence, it was Mike Rumbles that was constantly rebelling and causing chaos within that group. Jeremy's disputing that. You don't recall that at all. You know, Mr. Rumbles was the sweetness and light. No, he's a fine MSP, and I'm sure he'll be a welcome return back to the Parliament. But he's quite a character, and he was characterful within the previous group as well. Well done to them for getting back. Well done to the SNP for winning the election. Very bad night for Labour. There will have to be a huge retrospective. Astonishing result for the Conservatives, genuinely. Astonishing result for the Conservatives. Not back to full form, but back there. And well done, the Greens. Well done them all. Everybody's won them all, no surprises.
Charlie, Jeffrey, an SNP win, a new opposition force in the Conservatives as the second place party, and Labour with the worst result, if not for 100 years, since 1918.
Let's put it into perspective by going back a few years. The SNP with this result, seen from 10 years ago, extraordinary. It is a brilliant victory. Labour's results, let's look at the seats they've won in the Scottish Parliament. First one, 56, then 50, 46, 37, 24. This is a party that looks like it's in pretty much terminal decline. Do that for the Conservatives, 18, 18, 17, 15. This was a party on the deathbed. 31 this time, it's doubled. The Conservative Party has rediscovered a social base in rural Scotland, in the North East and in the South. The Labour Party has lost one in the west of Scotland and in central Scotland. Scottish politics has been turned upside down over these last few years.
What does this new Parliament look like then? Let's cross to David Henderson and see how it's shaping up. David.
Well, we've inched our way towards a result through the night, through the morning, and now we have it. Let's look first at the 73 constituency seats. Here's our map of Scotland. There are huge swathes of yellow. The SNP have won the lion's share of seats, 59 in all, spread throughout the country. But there's also plenty of blue there in the south of Scotland, but also here in Aberdeenshire West and in Edinburgh Central, where their leader Ruth Davidson won. They took 7 constituency seats, including 4 new wins. Meanwhile, Labour took a drubbing. They lost 13 seats and were left with just 3 first-past-the-post MSPs. The Lib Dems overtook them with 4, including a win for Willie Rennie in North East Fife. Of course, 56 MSPs were also elected through regional lists. These declarations arriving in the last few hours, they're crucial to the outcome. Labour gained 21 seats that way, the Conservatives 24, the SNP just 4, and the Greens trebling their tally of seats from the last Parliament with 6 MSPs. So here's how the Scottish Parliament looks as a result. In the centre of the chamber, this big block of yellow, that's the SNP with 63 seats. They remain the biggest party, but they're too short of an overall majority. Over here, the blue bloc, the Conservatives with 31 seats. They take over from Labour as the biggest opposition party. Then, over here, Labour, a party which was once the dominant force in Scottish politics. It's now relegated to third place with just 24 MSPs. The Greens there have 6 and the Lib Dems have 5. So that tallies with the BBC prediction we gave you earlier. We'll know who'll be governing. It's the SNP, led by Nicola Sturgeon, but they're going to need some help as a minority government if they're to pass legislation. The big question, who will it come from?
Thanks very much, David. A big win for the SNP in this election, but plenty for the Conservatives to smile about, not least with you in Aberdeen, Stephen Duff.
No, probably the final celebrants in a hall of Scottish Parliament elections 2016. The Conservatives have had a big night in the North East and in Scotland. They unexpectedly took Aberdeenshire West, and they took a fourth list seat away from the SNP in the North East as well, so defying the SNP that majority. But a big night too for the SNP in the North East. You can't take that away from them. They won all but one of the constituencies, one short on what they did in 2011. So the celebrations, I'm sure, continue for a wee bit while longer here at the RGU Sports Centre in Aberdeen.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed, and thanks to the Conservatives, timing their celebrations beautifully for when the cameras crossed to Aberdeen for the last time, where the last MSPs were elected in this 2016 Holyrood contest. Let's get some final thoughts from our political panel. An extraordinary election, Stuart Hosey, a big win for the SNP, but not quite as much as you won by last time.
A big win, not quite as much. One thing strikes me. PR has helped deliver a big result for the Tories and basically saved Labour from oblivion. But the Tories in particular, I hope they now come to love proportional representation at all forms of government.
Well, it's given you a job at Holyrood down the years, Jackson Carlaw. Is it time for a change of policy on that?
Well, I mean, I know we've got a significant number of first-past-the-post wins in this election as well. And, you know, that's 24 brand new members of the Parliament who are going to be coming from the Scottish Conservative ranks. Amongst them, a gold medal winning track athlete, an ex-soldier, a TV producer, a football referee, retail managers, hotel owners, businessmen, farmers, a real mix of expertise that is going to be part of that new Parliament.
Jeremy Purvis, from a Lib Dem point of view, you're there, you weren't wiped out, well, but you've been beaten by the Greens.
That was what was forecast, not only being wiped out off the map, but also losing the Orkney and Shetland, and they're fantastic results. We now have an anchor grip in the constituencies in Scotland. We have more constituencies now than the Labour Party in Scotland, which no one predicted at all. And I think that's to credit of Willie Rennie, who fought such an uplifting and quite an infectious campaign. And it's been, I think, defied predictions, and it's been a good result for us. But we've lost Jim Hume, and Alison McInnes is no longer part of the team for us in the Scottish Parliament. It's a great loss. She was outstanding. But overall, very satisfied.
The Labour Party has the deepest wounds after this election, Martin McCluskey. Some people have suggested your position is now terminal. Is that how you see it?
No, not at all. This is, you know, we've now got a very different Parliament. We've got a much broader group of parties in there. We are the largest party on the centre-left, providing opposition to the SNP. And I don't take the pessimistic view, unsurprisingly, of Jeremy Purvis earlier, where he said we were in terminal decline at all. And, you know, Charlie Jeffrey makes some interesting points, but in those central Scotland seats in the West and in Glasgow, it still is the Labour Party that is second in all of those constituencies. And, you know, I'm not trying to do down the result this evening, but, you know, we are coming second in those constituencies, and that is where we will have to build for the long haul.
Final thoughts, Brian Taylor.
The abiding image of the campaign is Willie Rennie and the pigs. The abiding image of tonight's election result is that incredible grin on the face of Ruth Davidson. She advised the candidates when she launched the manifesto, smile until your jaws ache. She didn't have to put it on tonight, she meant it.
It's been an extraordinary election, an extraordinary result. The SNP returned to government in Scotland for the third successive term, and they fall short of that overall majority. The Conservatives securing second place, the main party of opposition in the Scottish Parliament for the next 5 years, pushing Labour into third place, one of the worst results the party has suffered over the last century. The Liberal Democrats pushed into fifth by the Greens. From all of us on the BBC Scotland election team, thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Nicola Sturgeon Scottish National Party, 15,200. Doris is elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament. Ivan McKee is elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament. Sandra White is elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament. Humza Yousaf, Scottish National Party, 15,000.
Public notice that David Jackson Carlaw is duly elected as a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Eastwood constituency.
Gerald Joseph McGarvey, Scottish Labour Party, 3004. Total. 304, my apologies.